A pregnant woman, her belly swollen, ventured alone deep into the mountains to seek out a witch doctor, begging for her unborn child to be born healthy and strong. She lost her mother at a young age. Her father was an alcoholic, and she was raised by her older sisters. Her husband ran an inn, but he was born with a cleft lip and palate, and walked with a limp, which had left him unable to find a partner for her, already destitute and downtrodden. This was the best possible outcome. 3 years after her marriage, she bore 3 sons, but all perished before reaching their first birthday. Believing herself cursed, she dreaded losing another child. The shaman declared this child would be born safely and grow strong. Moreover, she would carry the history of the entire family. The shaman's words lifted a heavy weight from the woman's heart. Months later, a girl was born. Both husband and wife were overjoyed. Her daughter's successful birth not only silenced the gossip, but also brought boundless happiness to their lives. They named her Seonmi. Seonmi grew day by day under her parents' loving care. At that time, Japan's rule over the Korean peninsula continued. They squeezed the living space of the local people, making life increasingly difficult. This hardship was not merely economic but also profoundly psychological. One day, Seonmi accompanied her father to buy fish at the pier, where they encountered Japanese soldiers. Everyone instantly fell silent, lowering their heads. It was Seonmi's first time venturing out with her father, and she was fascinated by everything around her. She even dared to sneak a few glances at the Japanese soldiers. In her innocent age, she thought the fish just pulled from the sea looked unhappy. This dying fish, like the people trapped here, had only a fate of being at the mercy of others. Many fishermen lived near Seonmi's home and were familiar with her. A fisherman told Seonmi that even creatures as small as ants possess a will to survive. No matter the circumstances, all living things strive to live. Seonmi listened, understanding only part of it. At this age, she was still too young to feel the weight of life. Though young, having grown up around her parents, she absorbed their ways. Her talent for business was already beginning to show. She helped the fisherman sell the fish for nearly triple the original price. The fisherman was delighted and gave Seonmi a copper coin as a reward. Upon returning home, Seonmi was scolded by her mother for accepting the fisherman's coin. In her mother's eyes, the fisherman earned his money through hard labor. How could there be any spare money for Seonmi when feeding the family was already a struggle? As she spoke, her mother blamed her husband too, saying it was all because he spoiled their daughter too much. Her husband even wanted to send Seonmi to school. Her mother believed that women would eventually just marry, have children, and manage household chores. But her husband didn't think he was spoiling his daughter. He simply hoped that in such a harsh era, his daughter could experience enough kindness. Accepting that coin was also a lesson in feeling others' kindness. The power of love is always the strongest. As night fell, the fishermen gathered at Seonmi's home for dinner. Seated together, they envied Seonmi's father for his good fortune, a capable wife and a bright, sensible daughter. For many of them, looking ahead brought only pessimism and despair. The Japanese had seized their land, stolen their rice, and now sought to take their language too. Speaking of anger, one fisherman bitterly declared the Japanese didn't regard them as human. He longed to kill those Japanese and reclaim his homeland. Though several were drunk, such talk was dangerously reckless. Seonmi's mother, listening nearby, felt her heart race. With so many present, if word spread, it could spell utter ruin. Seonmi was still young, nothing could happen to them. Hiding behind the wall, Seonmi heard her mother's fear clearly. The next day, she stopped the fisherman. She made a suggestion beyond her years. She wanted the fisherman to leave this place voluntarily, because she was afraid. She didn't want to lose her parents. She didn't want to lose her happy life. The fisherman was moved by her sincerity. Even though leaving meant having nowhere to go, he still departed. But the matter didn't end with his departure. Days later, Japanese soldiers came knocking, demanding the fisherman's whereabouts. Clearly, someone had reported what happened that night. Before long, the fisherman was captured. Everyone was summoned to the pier to witness the scene. Seonmi clung tightly to her father, her eyes brimming with tears. This was her first time facing violence so directly. Shortly after, her father fell ill. After suffering through his illness, he closed his eyes forever. Looking back on his life, it was brief yet filled with happiness. His congenital disability had always made him feel life was unfair. But after meeting his wife and having Seonmi, he realized fate was irrelevant. Only by becoming strong could one cast off the shadows behind. He hoped Seonmi would grow into a strong person. Time flew by, and 9 years passed in the blink of an eye. Seonmi had blossomed into a young woman. She had taken on her father's role, frequently going to the pier to buy supplies. Facing Japanese officers, she still stood as straight as a young girl, refusing to bow her head. This defiant Xianmi caught the attention of merchant Gao Hansui. Gao inquired about Xianmi's background from those around him. Learning she had no notable lineage only deepened his curiosity. As Xianmi moved through crowds, she seemed to carry a divine light. His gaze was constantly drawn to her. Unconsciously, she seemed like a whirlpool, drawing people in with a single glance. Xianmi noticed this intense gaze and turned to meet his eyes. Their gazes locked, and the story began to unfold. On the way back, Xianmi overheard various rumors about Gao Hansui. Some said he did dirty work for Japanese bigwigs, his hands stained with many lives. Others claimed he never wore the same outfit twice. The many rumors about him piqued Xianmi's curiosity, and curiosity is often the beginning of love. One day, while Xianmi was buying fish by the sea, Gao Hansui suddenly rushed over. Fishermen weren't allowed to trade privately. This fisherman had broken the rule he himself had set. The fisherman was terrified, but Xianmi showed no fear. Her determined gaze told him this wasn't a sale, just an exchange. She merely traded the leftover tangerines for his catch. Gao Hansui wasn't heartless. His true anger stemmed from the fisherman secretly selling Xianmi a small fish. If such reckless fishing continued unchecked, these waters would soon die. Then everyone would lose their means of survival. What he hadn't anticipated was Xianmi instantly seeing through his thoughts and voicing them aloud. This was entirely unexpected, and he was stunned by Xianmi's sharpness. A stranger possessed such foresight? After a long silence, he forgave the fisherman. Seeing the crisis averted, Xianmi turned and left, but Gao Hansui's gaze lingered on her retreating figure, a barely perceptible smile touching his lips. Xianmi returned home as usual. Besides her mother, the household also sheltered two girls around Xianmi's age. Recently, Gao Hansui's arrival had become the biggest topic of conversation. The sisters kept asking Xianmi if Gao Hansui was handsome, though Xianmi only gave a casual reply. Her hands paused slightly in their movements. He wore a white suit, standing out from everyone else here. The next day, when Xianmi came to the market to sell oranges as usual, the dried fish vendor pulled out a package, claiming Gao Hansui had asked her to deliver it to Xianmi. In those conservative times, privately giving something carried the implication of a private engagement. Though Xianmi was curious about its contents, she couldn't casually accept gifts from a stranger. After selling her oranges and heading home, she spotted Gao Hansui ahead. To avoid an awkward encounter, she chose a different path. Instead, she encountered three Japanese youths. Not only did they verbally harass her, but they also began grabbing at her. Ignoring her struggles, they intended to assault her. At the critical moment, the door burst open. Gao Hansui had arrived. He swiftly subdued two of them and forced them to kneel before Xianmi, demanding an apology. Still shaken, Xianmi cowered in a corner. Gao Hansui escorted Xianmi home. On the return journey, he stood at the bow, facing the wind, gazing at the once familiar landscape before him. Complex emotions surged within. 14 years had passed since he left North Korea. The place had changed beyond recognition, now scarred and ravaged. No one would remember how beautiful and resilient this country once was. As they disembarked, he promised Xianmi he would never harm her. But Xianmi recalled the rumors she'd heard, that he wore each garment only once. Playfully, she asked if he would discard his shirt. "Bring me your clothes," she said. "I'll wash them for you tomorrow." This adorable girl, every smile and frown, had already found her way into Gao Hansui's heart. The next day, Gao Hansui arrived by the river as promised. Xianmi washed his clothes while they chatted. Learning she had never attended school and was illiterate, he felt a pang of regret. If Xianmi could read, perhaps she could leave this place someday. But Xianmi didn't want to leave. This was where she had grown up. Gao Hansui's words stunned Xianmi for a moment, but it lasted only a second before she snapped back to her senses. So what? No one chooses their birth. She was born poor and humble, uneducated and illiterate, but that was no reason for anyone to look down on her. She still had her dignity and pride. Her voice grew sharp as she spoke, and she stood up, basket in hand, ready to leave. Gao Hansui hurriedly explained from behind her that he meant no harm, only wanting to know if she had any dreams. He himself came from humble beginnings but had never given up on his dreams. Yet the very word dream felt impossibly distant to Xianmi. She had never left this place, never seen the outside world, even stretching her imagination to its limits. She couldn't picture what that world might be like. Yet through Gao Hansui's descriptions, the outside world took shape. Every household had electricity. Cars could take you anywhere. At night, the city's myriad lights cast enchanting reflections. It was a place utterly different from here. Gao Hansui had once been fortunate enough to visit America. He felt it had everything, yet nothing at all. From his words, Seonmi sensed the vastness of the world. She sensed Japan was not invincible. If the world was so vast, then one day they might drive the Japanese out. The spark in her eyes at that moment caught Gao Hanshui's attention. He felt an urge to stay with Seonmi for the long term. He would come to the riverbank often from now on, accompanying her while she washed clothes. Seonmi wondered why he would return. Since he was now practically Japanese, life over there must be better than here. But for Gao Hanshui, this was where he was born. He'd left penniless, yet now he'd returned in triumph. As they spoke, he rolled up his sleeves, bent down, and took the clothes from Seonmi's hands. To her astonished gaze, he began scrubbing them directly in the water. He told Seonmi that when he was young, his family had little. He and his father each owned only one set of clothes. Every night, they'd wash them and hang them to dry overnight for the next day. Sometimes, the clothes were still damp by morning. Seonmi hadn't imagined someone like him had such a past. Their bond grew closer. The weather had been dreadful lately. Days of relentless rain left everyone irritable. Seonmi couldn't go out to wash clothes either. After so long apart, the tendrils of longing for Gao Hanshui quietly took root in her heart. Only when the sky finally cleared again did Seonmi happily step outside. Gao Hanshui had been waiting by the riverbank for her since early morning. After so long apart, the emotions pent up within them could no longer be contained. On a deserted hillside, they broke the final taboo. Their skin touched. This was Seonmi's first time. Her transformation from girl to woman. It meant she had given herself completely to this man. In that era, it was a gamble of immense stakes. They lived like this for a while. Soon after, Seonmi began experiencing sudden nausea. At first, she thought it was merely food poisoning. Only when her close friend reminded her did she recall her missed period from the previous month. Seonmi had a strong suspicion. Thus, when she next met Gao Hanshui, she was unusually joyful. They first embraced passionately. Afterwards, Gao Hanshui presented her with a gold pocket watch as a token of his affection. During their intimacy, Seonmi revealed she was pregnant, but the reaction she anticipated never came. Gao Hanshui's expression changed instantly. He embraced Seonmi, demanding she bear him a son, yet the hesitation in his eyes was undeniable. Seonmi hoped he would soon come to formally propose and marry her, but this was destined to be nothing more than a fleeting illusion. Only now did she learn Gao Hanshui had a family in Osaka. He had never intended to marry Seonmi. He merely regarded her as a mistress. Seonmi's world shattered instantly. Though he could not marry her, he desperately wanted the child. He promised to purchase the grandest house in the area, ensuring Seonmi and her mother would never worry about their livelihood again. All he could offer Seonmi was financial support. What she thought was mutual affection turned out to be a foolish, misplaced devotion. This crushing revelation sent Seonmi reeling backward. She stared in disbelief at the man who had once showered her with passion. Now he wore an air of arrogance, even trying to force her to accept his terms. Gao Hanshui kept insisting the old man had died alone in some remote place. Girls sold their bodies just for a bowl of noodles. Children often starved to death in the night. In such a cruel world, merely surviving was a struggle. He believed his offer was a blessing for the impoverished Seonmi. All her dreams of a better future were shattered by the man before her. Even now, he insulted her, claiming she had schemed to get close to him from the start. After all, who would marry the daughter of a cripple? Seonmi could endure being betrayed, but she would not tolerate anyone insulting her father. Furious, she faced her suddenly monstrous lover. Saying nothing more, she turned and walked away. At that moment, a heavy rain began to fall. Another man in a suit had just arrived on the island. He inquired about the location of Seonmi's family inn. Dragging his weary body, he stepped into Seonmi's home. Seonmi returned through the downpour, clutching the pocket watch in her arms. The man behind her happened to approach just then and collapsed unconscious on the ground. Seonmi looked at her mother. She had intended to pour out all her grievances to her mother, but at this critical moment, saving the man took precedence. All of Seonmi's attention was focused on him. Her mother, a kind soul, even arranged for a doctor to attend to him. While the man remained unconscious, her mother discovered a letter among his belongings. His name was Isaac, a clergyman from a church, intending to travel to Osaka to reunite with his brother and sister-in-law. Unfortunately, he had contracted tuberculosis. Given its highly contagious nature and the medical limitations of the time, it was extremely dangerous. Concealing it was illegal, but reporting it to the Japanese would mean certain death for Isaac. Seonmi's mother, a kind woman, decided to wait one night and see how things developed. The next morning, Isaac's high fever had subsided. His symptoms eased, and he was no longer in mortal danger. Only then did Seonmi finally find the courage to confess her pregnancy to her mother. Her mother broke down instantly, desperate to know who the man was. But Xianmi clenched her teeth and insisted it wasn't forced. She steadfastly refused to reveal Gao Hanshui's name. At this point, speaking up would serve no purpose. Her mother had always believed Xianmi to be clever and mature, never anticipating this outcome. Yet she forgot that Xianmi was still just an inexperienced young girl, faced with a womanizer like Gao Hanshui. Xianmi's limited wisdom only acted as an accelerant for her emotions. Mother and daughter wept together. Such an incident meant she could never find a good match. It meant her future path would be even more rugged. But Isaac, on the other side of the wall, overheard their entire conversation. Facing the mother and daughter who had just saved him, he sat on the bed, deep in thought. Isaac recovered quickly. He wanted to go to town to send a telegram to his parents. His mother, worried about his health, had Xianmi accompany him. The moment they reached the pier, they bumped into Gao Hanshui. Isaac was still eagerly looking around, but Xianmi, unsure how to face him, lowered her head and fled. Later, Isaac took her to a noodle shop in town. This was the first time Xianmi had ever eaten out in her life. She picked up a mouthful of noodles and found them delicious. Isaac, however, didn't touch his chopsticks. After a few seconds of hesitation across the table, he decided to be honest with Xianmi. He confessed directly that he had overheard her conversation with her mother and knew she was pregnant. He didn't say this to blame her. Instead, he genuinely wanted to plan for her future from her perspective. Raising a child alone was simply too difficult for a woman. But Xianmi had already thought through all of this. She knew she and her child would be shunned by society. For her mother's business, she must leave the family in. She was willing to raise this child alone. Her father had never been accepted by society either. Yet he had given her complete, pure love. Now she had the courage to give that same love to this child. This wasn't any man's child, it was her own, even if it cost her everything. Xianmi's resilience and kindness moved Isaac. He posed his first question: could she forget the other man? Xianmi nodded. He followed with a second: could she love another? This struck Xianmi as absurd. Who would ever love her? The next moment, Isaac voiced his plan. He would take Xianmi away from their homeland to Osaka, to start a new life. In a way, this was his proposal. For Xianmi in that moment, it couldn't have been better. Whatever the future held, it was better than staying put. After a moment's thought, she nodded gratefully. Their destinies were now inextricably bound. Before leaving, Isaac planned to marry Xianmi. While having his suit tailored at the shop, he encountered Gao Hanshui, who had come to pick up his clothes. Ever since their encounter at the docks, Gao Hanshui had taken notice of Isaac. The moment Isaac spoke, the tension was palpable. He himself couldn't marry Xianmi, yet he couldn't bear to see anyone else take her. Gao Hanshui bluntly offered to pay if Isaac would abandon Xianmi. Isaac turned to the shopkeeper and announced his impending wedding. Even mentioning Xianmi's unborn child, Gao Hanshui's expression hardened instantly. The social conventions he prided himself on held no sway over Isaac, to ensure his daughter had a proper wedding. At the market, Xianmi's mother pushed through the bustling crowd to find an old acquaintance. She came today to buy some white rice. In this era, white rice was almost a privilege reserved for Japanese. If caught trading it privately, none of them could escape punishment. But upon hearing of Xianmi's wedding, the mother only wished to make her daughter a bowl of white rice. No one could remain unmoved. The elderly man silently took the bag and gave her 3 bowls of white rice. White rice was precious. Xianmi's mother rinsed it carefully, then steamed it over low heat as if performing a sacred ritual. She placed the cooked rice on the table. A simple table stood in the small hut. Xianmi and Isaac sat facing each other. This was her wedding feast. Thinking of the impending farewell, Xianmi's tears flowed uncontrollably. She picked up a spoonful of rice and stuffed it into her mouth, trying desperately to memorize the taste of home. The day of Xianmi's departure drew nearer. Her mother helped her pack her belongings. When she came to the market one last time to buy things, the shopkeepers were all reluctant to see her go. They were all poor people and refused to take her money. It was the only way they had to express their feelings. All this happened too quickly. So quickly that Gao Hanshui didn't know how to respond. He ordered someone to bring Xianmi to his office. Gao Hanshui saw the anger in Xianmi's eyes. To him, she was too naive. She was utterly fixated on the outside world. But he looked down on whatever good might be out there. He despised Isaac too. Their union, in his eyes, wasn't about happiness. It was merely 2 lowly souls huddling together for warmth. He judged Xianmi from his lofty perch, yet forgot he was the very architect of this mess. Without him, Xianmi would never have been driven to this point. Xianmi refused to let anyone look down on Isaac. He was her husband now, the one who had rescued her from the mud. To Xianmi, Gao Hanshui now brought only shame. Xianmi's stubbornness caught him off guard, and he was utterly enraged. He was certain that one day, Xianmi would kneel before him, begging. The day Xianmi left, the weather was beautiful. She hugged her two sisters goodbye. Her mother carried the packed bundles to see her off at the port. In the waiting room, her mother gave Xianmi final instructions. Once she arrived there, she must not make a single mistake. Everything must be flawless to avoid criticism. Though they might treat her harshly, she must remain forgiving and grateful. After these words, her mother produced a pair of rings. These were left by her father years ago. She placed them in Xianmi's hands. This parting between mother and daughter might well be their final farewell. Seated together, they wept, heads buried in each other's arms. Her mother told Xianmi to leave all her tears here. Once in Osaka, no one would be willing to hear her cry. Minutes later, Isaac came to find Xianmi. After setting foot on Japanese soil, Xianmi stayed for over 50 years. The wheels of time rolled relentlessly forward. We cannot yet know what trials she endured. Why did the household seem to lack a male head? In any case, her grandson Solomon grew up in considerable affluence. After a brief rest at home, Solomon departed for Tokyo to assume his post as an American parachuted into the company. His entrance immediately drew the employees' sidelong glances. Within 10 minutes, the new boss knocked on his office door. Solomon tactfully explained his Tokyo assignment was merely transitional, which finally eased the tension between them. In truth, beyond the project, social grace ruled the society. That day, the daughter of a finance ministry leader was marrying. Nearly every influential figure in finance attended, Solomon included. As guests mingled, mentions of his father, the arcade owner, always stung. He detected the subtle mockery in others' remarks, which filled him with shame. The banquet formally commenced, and the finance ministry leader came over to greet everyone. Meeting Solomon for the first time, his opening question was about Solomon's blood type. Solomon visibly paused before answering. Type O. The other man gave him a meaningful look and uttered an enigmatic remark. Optimism is an instinct. But how could Solomon fail to understand? This seemingly illogical exchange was actually the other man's distrust, questioning his loyalty. The reason for all this was simply his heritage. Though born and raised in Japan, his ancestors were all Korean. This Japanese official harbored reservations toward immigrant families like his. But Solomon didn't care at the time. His sole pursuit then was money. The acquisition process wasn't going as smoothly as he'd anticipated. Even though they'd offered above market price, the homeowner still refused to sell the land. The owner was an elderly woman around Xianmi's age, a Korean immigrant from the war era, who settled in Tokyo after the conflict ended. She had purchased this plot in 1955 for 4,000 yen, an amount now barely enough for a single meal, though the agency offered over 1 billion yen to acquire it. The grandmother refused to sell. Solomon's superior discussed the situation with him, insisting money could solve any problem. Success in this matter is crucial for both him and Solomon. Solomon considers himself a man without borders. In his eyes, the world is one vast economic community. Different currencies circulate globally. Today, nations differ only in name, not substance. He firmly believes he can transform everything here. Meanwhile, inside the arcade, Solomon's father, Moses, explains the mechanics of pinball machines to an intern. Winning brings joy, losing brings pain. This philosophy, Solomon realized, wasn't fundamentally different from his own financial philosophy. A few days later, Solomon visited the elderly landowner carrying a large square watermelon. The grandmother tended her vegetable garden in the courtyard, living a very frugal life. He immediately offered a staggering 10 billion yen, expecting her to be tempted. He was surprised when she only praised his fluent Korean. Her husband had passed away, and her children didn't speak Korean either. Compared to 10 billion yen, she was more fascinated by Solomon's fluent Korean. The reason Solomon spoke Korean was simple enough. His mother had passed away when he was very young. Solomon was raised entirely by his grandmother, Xianmi. His father worked tirelessly to support the family. Xianmi pushed a cart selling kimchi, her hands calloused from grinding. He recounted these things matter-of-factly. To him, the hardships the elderly constantly spoke of were merely to make their descendants feel guilty. Born into privilege, he had no grasp of what his elders endured. His presumptuous understanding caused the landlady's expression to harden instantly. When he spoke again, urging her to consider her children and accept his offer, he was shoved roughly aside. If her children were all like him, then perhaps it was better not to consider it at all. Dejected after this setback, Solomon had just returned to his office when a mysterious call came through. The moment the caller spoke, he could scarcely believe his ears. Hannah was Solomon's first love. She now held another identity, Solomon's non-blood-related sister. That is, Hannah's mother had later become involved with Solomon's father. Rumor had it Hannah had run away from home long ago. Her stepmother, deeply affectionate, had hired detectives but still couldn't find her. Solomon wondered how the caller had obtained his number, but Hannah wouldn't tell him, only reminiscing about their past together. He wasn't interested in these details. He only wanted to know where Hannah was. Hannah's words were evasive, saying only that she'd been in the darkness too long and couldn't find her way out. When Solomon pressed her again about her location, the call was abruptly hung up. Meanwhile, the detective in Osaka had made progress. It turned out Hannah had been working in the adult entertainment industry, which deeply pained her stepmother. But the immediate priority remained finding her. The only family member still by Seonmi's side was his sister-in-law. In-suk, advanced in years and stricken with cancer, now lay emaciated in bed. Seonmi meticulously tended to her 3 meals a day, yet In-suk seemed to have lost all will to live. Watching death approach step by step, she grew increasingly nostalgic for the past. Unable to forget those familiar faces, history had left deep scars upon her. She even asked Seonmi if she regretted choosing Isaac back then. Would her life have been different had she made another choice? To say she felt no regret at all would be a lie, yet Seonmi had always accepted it willingly. Her answer was acceptance. Days later, In-suk passed away. Of the older generation, only Seonmi remained. At the funeral, dressed in black, her expression was sorrowful. The flames in the crematorium burned fiercely. A life ended so abruptly. Back home, she held In-suk's ashes, unsure where to place them. Solomon suggested the piano, but Seonmi felt it wasn't right. Until the pastor from Korea arrived to conduct In-suk's funeral, he too moved the ashes to the piano. Truthfully, Seonmi saw Isaac's reflection in the young pastor. Sorting through In-suk's belongings, her heart was heavy with sorrow. Back then, she'd been too busy earning money to support the family. Without In-suk watching the children, she couldn't imagine how she'd have endured. Solomon had heard Seonmi recount her heartbreaking past countless times. He, too, complained to her about failing to persuade the landowner to sell. His work made no progress either. Seonmi was astonished that someone could resist such a large sum of money. This person must have some kind of problem. Even she couldn't understand how anyone could choose to live forever in the past. A house is just a roof and walls. Holding on to it empty has no meaning. After all that hardship, the dead are gone. Shouldn't the living look forward? Seonmi's words sparked an idea in Solomon. He suddenly realized he couldn't persuade the owner, but perhaps the grandmother could. After all, they were both from that era. They might understand each other's feelings. So Solomon brought Seonmi to Tokyo and knocked on the grandmother's door. The grandmother was initially unwelcoming but still invited them to share a meal. Living alone for years, she hadn't had a proper conversation in ages. Seeing Seonmi felt strangely familiar. She proudly showed off her 6th grade graduation certificate. Though elderly now, she hadn't attended school as a child. Being illiterate felt like being cut off from the world. This had always made her feel inferior, so she chose to fill that void in her twilight years. Seonmi understood her feelings. She too had been denied an education due to her mother's opposition. Illiteracy had also blocked her path to a brighter future. The two women shared a deep connection and found much to talk about. During the meal, Seonmi immediately tasted the difference in the rice. The fragrance lingered on her lips and teeth, filled with profound nostalgia. Solomon couldn't tell the difference. To him, all rice in the world tasted the same. But for Seonmi, it was different. The rice from her hometown carried special memories. It was the white rice her mother had risked so much to obtain for her wedding day. The landlady asked Seonmi if she ever returned. Seonmi felt the place had changed beyond recognition. What was the point of going back? The landlady disagreed. Only by stepping onto that familiar land again could one truly grasp the weight of the word hometown. Seonmi thought of In-suk again. She had toiled her whole life, only to have her life stolen by illness. Her only regret might have been never returning home. The landlady looked at Seonmi. It wasn't too late. She knew Solomon had brought Seonmi to persuade her to sell the land. She felt Solomon was trying to manipulate her sympathy. But Solomon said he hadn't experienced the old world and wasn't interested in it. He was a businessman who only knew the times had changed. This money could bring the landlady and her family a better life. How was this any different from compensation from the Japanese? On the way back, Seonmi told Solomon the landowner grandmother wished to pass away in that house. One cannot spend their entire life living for their children. When would that ever end? Seeing this fellow sufferer, her compassion clearly stirred. She had forgotten why she had come to persuade her. But sadly, this was Solomon's job. Seonmi said no more. She didn't want to put her grandson in a difficult position. Solomon had barely returned to the office when his boss informed him he'd succeeded. The landlady had agreed to sell the plot. The swift turn of events caught Solomon off guard. Still, He was overjoyed his days of hard work had finally paid off. His boss was already planning to pop champagne early to celebrate. The moment he stepped into his office, Hannah's call came through again. Hannah was coughing incessantly on the other end. Solomon grew concerned and wanted to speak with her longer, but his boss walked in and pulled him away immediately. After returning from Tokyo, Seonmi rushed straight to her son's arcade. She now understood In-suk's wish. In-suk surely wanted to return to her roots, to see her homeland one last time. She didn't want to bury In-suk here. She would take her back to her hometown in Korea. Not a second to waste. Thus began Seonmi's journey home after over 50 years of separation. The Seonmi of 1989 was returning to her homeland. Meanwhile, the Seonmi of the 1930s was crossing the vast ocean. Back then, she had prepared herself for a permanent farewell to her homeland. After dozens of days of rough sailing, the ship finally docked. They arrived in Osaka. Isaac's brother came to the pier to greet him. The brothers embraced warmly after so long apart. Isaac then introduced Seonmi to his brother. Seeing Seonmi's prominently rounded belly, the older brother grew uneasy. Isaac's marriage news came as a complete shock. Both he and his wife were utterly taken aback. This was Seonmi's first time in Osaka. Everything around her was utterly novel. She rode a tram for the very first time. His brother happily told Isaac he was now a foreman at a biscuit factory. Compared to the quiet nights back home, Osaka's evenings were dazzling. It was late at night, yet construction sites still hummed with activity. Everything seemed to thrive. After passing through bustling districts, the tram finally reached the dilapidated old town. This area of Osaka was primarily inhabited by Koreans. People and animals lived side by side in cramped quarters, a melting pot of diverse crowds. This was nothing like Isaac had imagined. He hadn't anticipated his brother's situation being so difficult. His brother noticed his shock but shrugged it off. The first year they arrived here, their life had been far harder than it was now. Here, no one cared about the life or death of a Korean. They walked for a long time before finally reaching home. The house was tidy and well-kept. In-suk opened the door. She was gentle, beautiful, and warm. She kindly pulled Seonmi down to sit. She had even prepared white rice especially for her. The sight of the rice stirred Seonmi's homesickness. She covered her face and began to cry. Lying in bed that night, Seonmi felt deeply saddened. She believed she had disappointed her brother and sister-in-law. She sensed they weren't welcome here, but at least Isaac stood by her side. He told Seonmi she owed him nothing, though they'd known each other only briefly. Seonmi's resilience and unwavering courage had been a constant source of strength for him. Everything he'd done for her, he'd done willingly. He didn't care what his brother and sister-in-law thought, nor did he ever see Seonmi as a burden. At that moment, their hearts finally drew close. He gave Seonmi a gentle kiss. This was their true wedding night. Time passed quickly. Seonmi's belly grew larger and larger. Though she deeply missed her homeland, she was striving to adapt to her new life. A few days later, a creditor suddenly came to the door. He claimed her brother had incurred a high-interest loan totaling 160 yen. This money had been borrowed 2 months prior. The reason for the loan was that her younger brother needed to purchase an additional ship ticket for his wedding. In-suk had never dealt with such matters before. She stood frozen, somewhat at a loss. Seonmi knew this debt stemmed from her own actions. She stepped forward to ask where repayment could be made, then pledged to settle the entire debt. Both In-suk and the creditor found it unbelievable. Where would she get so much money? Seonmi then produced the gold watch, falsely claiming it was a keepsake from her mother. She intended to pawn it to pay off the debt. Such public exposure was unthinkable for a woman in those times. In-suk hesitated, suggesting they wait for her husband's return. But Seonmi knew her brother must have been desperate to face debt collectors at home. Since the debt stemmed from her actions, she insisted on settling it herself. Persisting, she persuaded In-suk to accompany her to the pawnshop. Initially, the pawnbroker offered only 50 yen. Seonmi wasn't foolish. She knew the watch was worth at least 300 yen. That was her bottom line. The owner tried every trick in the book but couldn't budge her. In the end, the deal was struck. After leaving the pawnshop, In-suk stood frozen in place, hesitating. Going to the bustling market to repay high-interest loans was utterly undignified. Such dirty work should be left to men. In-suk's background was vastly different from Seonmi's. Before arriving in Osaka, she had never handled money, never spoken to strangers, never washed clothes, never cooked a meal. She was starting almost entirely from scratch. But Seonmi had helped her mother manage the household since childhood. Even after arriving, she proved adept at both indoor and outdoor tasks. Seonmi's presence made In-suk feel foolish. She was also terrified, unsure when this life would end. Seonmi knew she had to repay this debt herself. She took In-suk's hand, offering her strength. The two women resolved to stand together, to face the unknown fears head-on. They successfully repaid the loan shark. The moment the seal was stamped, both breathed a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, an unexpected figure appeared at the pawnshop. Xianmi's pawn watch was bought back by Gao Hansui. He had long anticipated this day. He believed marrying a man like Isaac would only force Xianmi to pay an even greater price in the future. That evening, upon returning home, her brother learned everything. Far from being pleased, he erupted into a fierce argument with Insuk. His pride had been deeply wounded. As the man of the house, he should be in charge. Finally, he turned his anger towards Xianmi. He had always harbored intense prejudice against her, directly hurling insults at her, calling her shameless. Two women going out to repay loan sharks? Utterly disgraceful. He cared only for his own face, never considering that these two women, whom he saw as weak, had just navigated a crisis that could have destroyed their entire family. He then demanded to know the origin of the gold watch. He couldn't believe Xianmi's mother could afford such an expensive item. He had also long harbored suspicions about the child growing inside Xianmi. Qujin slammed the door and stormed out. His wife hurried after him. She was even apologizing for her own actions. Meanwhile, inside the house, Xianmi's water broke. Isaac, out on the street, remained completely unaware of the turmoil unfolding at home. The woman on the street was still seeking his help to persuade her son to return home. He found the woman's son working at a construction site. The boy told Isaac that his father had died when he was just 14. At such a young age, he had to support his entire family. His face smudged with grime. He couldn't understand this life. What difference was there between humans and beasts? Everywhere was sorrow and fear. He even felt he wasn't truly human. Here, the Japanese looked down on them. They themselves drank themselves into oblivion and fought. They returned home to bully wives weaker than themselves, living by rules set by others, yet never having enough to eat or wear. He was utterly weary of it all. If the rules are unfair, why not overturn them? His words made Isaac ponder deeply, like a pebble dropped into a calm pond. They sent ripples through his heart. They also planted seeds for the choices he would make in his future life. By the time Isaac returned home, Xianmi was nearly ready to give birth. Her face contorted with pain, yet she still urged her husband to find his brother. She knew Insuk had been constantly worried, but there was no doctor here. Xianmi could only entrust the fate of mother and child to heaven. When Isaac found his brother, he was arguing with someone in a tavern. Seeing his younger brother arrive sobered him up considerably. Learning Xianmi was in labor, he still insisted on finishing his drink. Isaac was deeply worried but could only sit down and keep his brother company. They had been nobles back in Joseon. Here, they could only live the lowest of lives. Qujin hadn't yet awakened from his wealthy delusion, but Isaac saw it all clearly. Deep into the night, Xianmi still struggled. The excruciating pain in her lower abdomen tore at her heart. Her cries alerted the woman next door. Fortunately, the woman had experience delivering piglets. With her help, the delivery progressed smoothly. On the way home, Qujin vented his resentment towards Xianmi in front of Isaac, but Isaac reminded him that without Xianmi, he wouldn't be alive today. Being with Xianmi gave his life meaning. He hoped his child could grow up in sunlight, in an environment filled with love. Qujin stared at his brother, shock written across his eyes. He never imagined his brother had matured so profoundly, though he couldn't pinpoint when it began. As they entered the house, Xianmi's child was safely delivered. Xianmi invited Qujin to name the baby. Gazing at this fragile little life, the glaciers of prejudice within Qujin melted into tears of release. This child brought a new world. He named the baby Noah. The smoke from the kitchen fires still rose. Xianmi had already begun nursing the infant. Isaac no longer wore a suit. He dressed in a worker's uniform, wanting to be like everyone else. Gao Hansui naturally learned of Xianmi's son. He had returned to Japan. At home, he confessed to his wife that he had fathered a child outside their marriage, but she didn't care. Their union had long been a mere formality. Truthfully, this path wasn't what he'd envisioned from the start. At the story's beginning, who among us wasn't a dragon-slaying youth? Time rewinds to 1923. Young Gao Hansui and his father relied solely on each other. His job was as a tutor. His father managed the accounts at a boxing gym. Together, they journeyed far from home to Yokohama, Japan, but they were never truly Japanese. Here, they always felt different from others. His excellent English allowed him to form a close bond with the American student he tutored. The student was heading to Yale the following year. He hoped to bring Gao Hansui along, and the family agreed. In this era of war, perhaps only Americans lived in a paradise untouched by conflict. The turmoil barely affected their lavish lifestyle. One day, Gao Hansui returned to the boxing gym and overheard a conversation between his father and the owner. His father had embezzled money from the accounts, and the owner had discovered it. The money? In a moment of recklessness, he'd given it all to a woman. When the truth came out, his father had no choice but to seek the woman out for the money. She shook her head, saying she'd spent it all. With matters at this point, Gao Hansui resolved to borrow money from his American employer. His father forbade it, fearing the employer would look down on his son and rob him of his chance to soar. But to Gao Hansui, nothing mattered more than his father. Gao Hansui returned to the boxing gym to plead with the owner. His father knelt before the owner, begging with what little dignity he had left to spare his son. Rules are rules, the father must pay the price. Just as the boss ordered his men to act, the earthquake struck. The earth shook violently, the world spinning. Gao Hansui was knocked unconscious. His father called out frantically. Then, in a moment of distraction, he was struck down by a falling beam. He collapsed right before Gao Hansui's eyes. The earthquake raged on. The boss pulled Gao Hansui out the door, racing toward higher ground. In the blink of an eye, Gao Hansui lost his father. Truthfully, the boss never intended to kill Gao Hansui's father, he only wanted repayment. But no one could have foreseen the disaster striking so suddenly. Gao Hansui clutched his head, weeping, yet the boss told him he must forge his own destiny. He had to find the Americans and leave with them. Only then would his father's death not be in vain. Hours later, Gao Hansui arrived at the Americans' home, weighed down by grief and anguish. They were frantically packing their belongings. He had made his decision, he would leave this place. But aftershocks kept shaking the ground, and the roads outside were nearly destroyed. The luggage loaded onto the car was impossible to take. They could only abandon these worldly possessions and squeeze through the crowd toward the pier. Yet in the chaos, he lost track of the American mother and child. A fierce will to survive surged through his mind. He kept running forward. He was fortunate to have survived this great catastrophe. That night, amid the ruins, he discovered the American family. They had perished in the disaster. Before natural calamity, all are truly equal. He approached and took their belongings, a gold pocket watch. It was the very watch he later gave to Xianmi. America was no longer an option. In Yokohama, he had no one, so he followed his father's former employer. The city had yet to recover from the disaster's terror. Everyone walked tearfully, trembling with fear, on the way home with his boss. Rumors spread about a mass prison break at the facility holding North Korean prisoners. It was said the North Korean inmates had poisoned the water and were looting, but these were all lies. Those prisoners who had briefly gained freedom during the earthquake were now merely struggling to survive. Several people happened to encounter 4 North Koreans on the road. The North Koreans had barely left when their pursuers arrived. Because Gao Hansui was North Korean, the boss temporarily hid him in a farmer's cart. He hid inside a wooden crate, not daring to breathe a word. He listened as the pursuers outside hurled every insulting word at the North Koreans. Being born in North Korea had become an original sin. Why was the world filled with discrimination and prejudice? The 4 Koreans were eventually found. They were hiding in a nearby estate. Unexpectedly, the pursuers lit torches and burned them alive inside. Gao Hansui, trapped in his crate, roared in fury, yet it was futile. Had he been discovered, he too would have been thrown into the raging flames. The boss reunited with his family, both having narrowly escaped death. Under the pretext of repaying debts, he kept Gao Hansui lying on a tattered straw mat beneath a star-filled sky. Gao Hansui gained a profound new understanding of life. In mere days, his fate had undergone a cataclysmic shift. He would survive, he would endure, and he would thrive, for his father watched over him from the heavens. Thus ends this recollection. What trials did he endure to reach this day? How did he amass such immense wealth and status? We cannot yet know, but it must have been a grueling path, transforming the once dragon-slaying youth into the despicable, mercenary figure he is today. Let us continue with Solomon's story. In 1989, the landlady agreed to sell the property. The day for signing the contract arrived swiftly. The landlady's family arrived at the exchange. Her children were all joyful. Only her own face remained expressionless. She scrutinized the contract word by word. Her children urged her to sign, but she remained stubbornly unyielding. Time ticked by. As if she needed to scrutinize every single word, Solomon finally spoke up, reminding her she had already won. Her persistence had secured immense wealth for future generations. Her descendants would never have to worry about money again. Yet to the landlady, these words sounded like a curse. Solomon didn't see wealth as a curse. He even offered an example. The grandmother had boarded a ship back to Korea today. 50 years ago, she arrived with nothing. But today, she was returning in first class. That was the power of money. The landlady interrupted Solomon, recounting her own past. Back then, Her father had been a miner. No one would rent them a house. They were shunned for being noisy, for being dirty. The root cause wasn't just their poverty, but their bloodline. They could only afford rent by cramming 2 or 3 families into one place. They faced discrimination and verbal abuse. The Japanese investors stared at her, waiting only for her signature, showing not a shred of respect. The landlady countered Solomon, "If I were your grandmother, could you bear to let me sit here facing these smug faces?" She told Solomon that every drop of blood in her veins was resisting signing. She spoke these words in Korean, which no one around understood. Solomon looked at the landlady. Without thinking, he blurted out 3 words, "Don't sign." The landlady relaxed. This kid still had some backbone. She exhaled deeply and stood up to leave. The scheduled contract signing failed. Everyone's efforts vanished into thin air. His boss immediately launched into a rage right in front of Solomon. He could only endure the fury in silence. 3 years of their entire team's hard work vanished in that instant. Because of Solomon's Korean heritage, those around him had never fully trusted him. Now, this situation seemed to confirm he was untrustworthy. It all happened too fast. He couldn't even make sense of it himself. He ran down the stairs, out of the company, ripped off his tie, and sprinted down the street. His heart was torn by agony and turmoil. The world fell silent before him. He didn't know why he acted this way. Confusion filled his mind. Someone played the piano in front of the station. As if possessed, he danced in the pouring rain to the music. Infinite vitality erupted from his depths. Even if he couldn't explain it, he followed his instincts. After messing things up, Solomon was temporarily out of work. An old classmate met him and gave him a lead on Hannah. He didn't understand why Solomon had acted that way. Truthfully, Solomon didn't understand it either. He'd always cared deeply about that job. Now, facing unemployment, he felt strangely at peace. Sitting alone on the balcony, he gazed into the distance. A female colleague from the office approached him to chat. It turned out she'd happened to see him dancing wildly in the rain that day. Being seen by someone familiar at such a moment, especially a colleague he was competing with, made him feel a bit embarrassed. But the situation that day had truly caught him off guard. It felt like, in an instant, everything had slipped beyond his grasp. He'd run outside when he heard that music. Even now, he struggled to describe that feeling. He felt like he stood atop the world, wanting to spread his wings and fly away, shattering all prejudice and confinement. Solomon's career was in turmoil. Xianmi and her son had already returned to their homeland. Before the car reached its destination, she couldn't wait to get out. She stood by the shore, letting the waves wet her feet. These were the waves of her homeland. This was the rain of her homeland. The sea breeze carried the scent of home. For Xianmi, who had been away for over 50 years, it was a long-awaited reunion. It was now 1989. And everything had changed. The marketplace bustled with people living peaceful, prosperous lives. The dark clouds of war had long since dissipated. The next day, Xianmi and her son took a boat out to sea. She scattered Insuk's ashes into the ocean, letting Insuk rest eternally in the waters of her homeland. Rarely returning, she visited the place where her father had once been buried. She had intended to pay her respects, but the site was now a parking lot. Everything had changed beyond recognition. Xianmi felt a flutter of panic. At least her son was by her side now. Together, they went to the relevant authorities hoping to find some clues, but she dared not hold out much hope. After all, the place had changed so drastically that finding a living person was difficult enough, let alone a grave. Yet, there's always a glimmer of hope. A government worker told her someone had left a note for her. When the name on the note was read aloud, Xianmi was startled. The note was signed by Haesuk, one of the orphan girls her mother had adopted years ago. Following the address on the note, Xianmi nervously rang Haesuk's doorbell. The door opened. Tears welled up in Xianmi's eyes. Xianmi revealed her identity. Haesuk, standing across from her, instantly burst into tears. 50 years of time lay between them as they sat facing each other. Haesuk told Xianmi that war broke out shortly after she left. The world grew increasingly chaotic, and life became harder. One day, a man approached Xianmi's mother, offering the sisters better work in Manchukuo. They didn't want to leave Xianmi's mother behind, but there was no other way out at that time. Haesuk didn't recount what they endured in Manchuria, yet they somehow survived until the war's end. After returning home post-war, however, they never saw Xianmi's mother again. Tears welled in Xianmi's eyes as she listened. She understood that mere survival had drained every ounce of strength. Thanks to Haesuk, Xianmi had found her father's grave. Had Haesuk not reburied him, his remains would have long since vanished. Their shared ordeal made her realize she was the luckiest of them all. Her departure back then, by some twist of fate, had spared her the horrors of war. Standing before her father's grave, She finally felt at peace. 50 years of homesickness had found a place to rest. Her life now held no regrets. Meanwhile, Solomon had finally resolved to search for Hannah. Following his old classmate's lead, he carried Hannah's photo through narrow alleys, asking around, yet returned empty-handed each time. Hannah seemed to have vanished into thin air. Disappointment at work only deepened his longing for her. He recalled the times they spent together back then. They were both still young, and he was still in middle school. One day after school, they went to the convenience store to buy something. He hadn't brought any money, but Hannah didn't care. She simply grabbed a rice ball and squeezed it firmly. She had never been one to follow the rules, yet it was precisely this rebellious spirit that drew Solomon to her. Hannah wanted to go to America and even suggested eloping with Solomon. Under Hannah's insistence, Solomon stole chocolate from the convenience store, but lacking experience, he was caught. Terrified, he frantically apologized to the owner. The owner, however, was furious and immediately called the police. The shopkeeper's stream of discriminatory insults calling Solomon a dirty Korean pushed him over the edge. He swung a punch at the man and was taken straight to the police station. At first, the station refused to release him. Fortunately, his father pulled strings at the critical moment and got him out. His father could tell at a glance that Solomon's arrest was connected to Hannah. Having reached this point, he had to intervene. That's why he decided to send Solomon to study in America. Solomon lifted his head from his memories. He hadn't seen Hannah since then. Perseverance paid off. His stepmother finally found Hannah. She was terminally ill with AIDS, her life hanging by a thread. No one knew how much time she had left. Maybe months, maybe weeks. After years apart, their reunion was a farewell before death. Solomon was completely stunned. He had hoped Hannah would go to America for better medical care, but Hannah refused his offer. America had always been Hannah's dream, but she couldn't go there clinging to life like this. Lying in her hospital bed, sunglasses on, sipping soda, she seemed to imagine herself already in Hawaii. Born into a poor environment, she had always envied Solomon, and all children born into privilege. Yet the man who infected her with HIV was also from such a privileged background. Behind the glittering facade she'd envied crawled nothing but filthy maggots. She had no illusions left, no expectations. But Hannah understood Solomon better than anyone. She knew there was something different within him. Hannah's words stirred a storm within Solomon. He no longer clung to this job. He went to the company, grabbed his luggage, went downstairs, and tossed it straight into the pool. To say he felt nothing would be a lie. Behind him, a man suddenly approached to strike up a conversation. Solomon turned around. It was Mr. Takeo, a major client of the company. What surprised him was that Takeo knew everything he had been through. That night, Solomon and Takeo sat in a taxi. Both men shared similar experiences, but their inner sense of self was too strong. They couldn't keep themselves asleep in the fantasy of the elite narrative. Thus, the inevitable outcome was always departure. Takeo told Solomon he wanted to venture into the pachinko business and open game centers worldwide. In the education Solomon had always received, only those without ambition opened game centers. But Takeo didn't see it that way. He invited Solomon to join him in starting the business and asked him to think it over. In the past, Solomon would have refused immediately, but times had changed. He had nowhere else to go. This might just be a path forward. He didn't accept immediately, but he didn't refuse either. Hannah's condition in the hospital deteriorated day by day, breaking her mother's heart. Yet Hannah showed no gratitude. She even confronted her mother, questioning how she could have hooked up with Solomon's father. Her words humiliated her mother, but she refused to argue with her daughter again. Her mother's calmness only fueled Hannah's rage. This hopeless existence was unbearably painful. She didn't know whom to blame or where she'd gone wrong. Through her son, Sianmi was technically Hannah's grandmother. She brought supplies to visit Hannah, and told her, "Your mother spent a fortune searching for you." No mother would abandon her own daughter. Sianmi had never particularly liked Hannah or her mother, but she still did her best with what she could. Facing Sianmi, Hannah refused to hide her feelings. Everyone saw Sianmi as a saint, but in Hannah's eyes, Sianmi was the reason she ran away from home. After the convenience store incident, Solomon was sent to America. Sianmi claimed it was a blessing Solomon was free of her. If he'd stayed, he would have been utterly ruined. It was precisely because of Sianmi's words that Hannah left home. Yet years of misunderstanding finally had a chance to be addressed. Sianmi explained that the she referred to wasn't Hannah, but herself. She told Hannah there had been another son. He too was a good child, but she had destroyed his life with her own hands. Now, her other son had left her. She didn't continue, but she must have been referring to her eldest son, Noah. The hatred and misunderstanding in Hannah's heart were finally soothed. All the bitterness within her vanished. and she no longer rejected her mother. She felt her current appearance was ugly, but her mother only cared whether she was in pain. During a break from caring for Hannah, Solomon told Xianmi about his dismissal. He had advised the landlady not to sign the contract, but he blamed it all on Xianmi. Her presence had made him feel sympathy for the landlady, and it was that sympathy that had made him weak. Yet in Xianmi's eyes, this wasn't weakness. Quite the opposite, it was courage. Solomon couldn't comprehend this at all. He even thought Xianmi must hate him and envy everything he had that she lacked. But Xianmi looked at him and told her grandson that she too had once rejected the glittering, superficial life of luxury. Her poverty wasn't without solutions. She simply chose to follow her heart. Solomon knew nothing of these past events, and such a choice was hard for him to grasp. But for Xianmi, she couldn't split herself in two. She couldn't live a life contrary to her own will. How unachieved success matters more than achieving success itself. If the process disgusts even yourself, what meaning does that success hold? Xianmi's words gave Solomon pause. Yet when he shared the same story with his father, Moses couldn't comprehend it at all. The deal was already done, wasn't it? He understood even less why his son would publicly tell the landlady not to sign the contract. This was nothing short of sabotaging his own future. He urged his son to rush back to the US to salvage the situation, but Solomon told him there was no going back to America. Now, only one path lay before him: starting a business with Takeo. At the mention of Takeo, Moses' expression suddenly turned tense. He didn't want his son associating with Takeo. He certainly didn't want his son following in his footsteps to open an arcade. He would not permit Solomon to start a business running an arcade. Solomon couldn't fathom his father's stubbornness. The matter remained unresolved for now, as Hannah's condition steadily deteriorated. Her life was nearing its end. In that moment, Solomon was filled with regret. He apologized for leaving. He had always lived according to others' expectations, never truly living for himself. Hannah struggled to sit up. On her deathbed, she urged Solomon to fight for everything he desired in life. Hannah's words pushed Solomon to make his final decision. He sought out Takeo, but not for the arcade. He believed the hotel project was still worth pursuing. Nearly 10 billion yen had already been invested in this venture. Without the land owned by the elderly landlady, the entire project would collapse. A massive business opportunity lay hidden within. Whoever secured that land first would seize the initiative. He suspected Takeo had ways to pressure the landlady into selling. Meanwhile, he could negotiate a deal with his former employer. Then they could jack up the price and rake in a massive profit. Takeo didn't immediately agree to Solomon's proposal. Instead, he warned Solomon the land's value would plummet. Everyone assumed the real estate boom would last forever, but the crash could happen in an instant. Nothing lasts forever. That's why you have to act fast. He accepted Solomon's proposal. After nightfall, a burly man appeared outside the landlady's house. The dog he led barked furiously, forcing the old woman back inside. This was Takeo's unique method of intimidation. Regarding Solomon's situation, the father grew impatient. He even lashed out at Xianmi. He worried deeply about his son. What good was it to have raised him well from childhood? Hadn't Noah been raised well too? The name Noah pierced Xianmi's heart. Her eyes filled with tears. She would never let the same fate befall her grandson. But what exactly was that fate? Neither of them mentioned it. At the hospital, Hannah was drifting into a deep sleep. Solomon burst in. Ignoring everyone's pleas, he pushed Hannah's hospital bed frantically toward the rooftop, placing a flower crown upon her head. He was sending Hannah to the Hawaii of her dreams. In her final moments, Hannah finally fulfilled her dream. With a smile of intoxicating contentment, she left this troubled world. After all this, Xianmi took out the golden pocket watch and handed it to Solomon. She had always believed this watch was a curse, that it had set her on a lifetime of wandering, but now she no longer thought so. In her darkest hour, it was this watch that saved her family. Now, by giving it to Solomon, she offered a blessing. Hadn't Xianmi sold this watch? What twists and turns had it endured to return? Let time rewind to 1938. Noah was now in elementary school. Xianmi's life was filled with happiness. She and Isaac had their own child. Their youngest son was named Moses. He would become Solomon's father in the future. Isaac didn't want Noah to feel unloved because of Moses. Every day, Isaac would pick Noah up from school, but that day, he was nowhere to be seen. Noah returned home alone and told Xianmi he hadn't waited for his father. A sense of foreboding rose in her heart. She took her son to the church and learned that Isaac had been arrested. The priest told Xianmi that the police had come specifically for Isaac. That meant an accomplice had betrayed him. Isaac was in grave danger. Xianmi felt a sense of disbelief. Isaac was being interrogated. Unless evidence proved his innocence, he would not be released. Outside the police station, Xianmi bumped into a woman visiting an inmate. When the woman heard Xianmi mention her husband was a pastor, excitement flashed across her face. Xianmi was puzzled. How did this stranger know her husband? She followed the woman into an alley. From the woman, Xianmi learned her husband was the leader of the local workers' organization. He had been inspiring and leading his fellow citizens in resistance. Through the woman's introduction, Xianmi met Mr. Ryota, the supreme leader of the underground movement. Meanwhile, Isaac Eugene sought help from his boss, but upon hearing it was a political crime, the boss panicked. Sitting across from Ryota and his daughter, Xianmi remained bewildered. Isaac had never mentioned these two people. Because he wanted to protect his family, he didn't want his wife entangled in this turmoil. Here, she finally received the definitive answer. They stood united with the workers, opposing the emperor to fight for equal treatment. Learning this truth, Xianmi completely broke down. Though illiterate, she understood the weight of the words opposing the emperor. Her pain was unbearable. Why did no one consider their lives? Yet Ryota's daughter blamed Xianmi. In her eyes, Isaac had taken such risks solely for Xianmi and his son. He chose something greater. Xianmi should understand and support him. To Xianmi, any lofty ideals paled and lost meaning before the brutal reality of life. Ryota's daughter's delicate hands showed she'd never known hardship. What right did someone like her have to mock her fear as meaningless? She only wished to bring her husband home. Then the family could live together peacefully. As they spoke, police burst in. Xianmi immediately shielded Noah behind her back. Because she was with Ryota, Xianmi was also taken to the police headquarters. During the interrogation, she claimed to know nothing. They presented her with the progressive newspaper. But Xianmi was illiterate. Her lack of literacy, ironically, saved her in this absurd moment. She truly knew nothing. So naturally, she couldn't confess to anything. Because she had her children. Seeing they couldn't extract anything, the interrogation ended. Exhausted, Xianmi dragged Noah home. But as soon as they stepped out of the police station, they bumped into Isaac. He was being transferred to another prison. Noah went wild, charging through the iron gate and chasing after the car. Inside, Isaac's heart ached. He had chosen something greater. Did he regret it now? Noah couldn't catch up. The car took his father away. Birds circled in the sky. Xianmi lost her small joys. Her tragic life officially began. Back home, she lay in bed, unable to sleep. She took out the ring her mother had left her and left at dawn. From now on, she would bear the full weight of life. She never accepted fate. No matter what she faced, nothing could stop her vibrant life force. She decided to sell kimchi at the market to supplement the household income. Eugene discovered this and, true to form, his chauvinistic tendencies flared up again. But faced with the stubborn Xianmi and the undeniable hardship before them, he relented. Without his father's companionship, Noah was also deeply saddened. That day, on his way to school, Cao Hansui suddenly appeared. He approached Noah and asked why he didn't take the shorter route. Noah took this path because of Isaac. Isaac used to bring him here every time, just to hear the old lady's piano. Isaac was a romantic, but Gao Hansui was not. Noah was his son. He had to step up now and make Noah face reality. He told Noah about the Great Central Earthquake and shared his own experience of losing his father. He told Noah that merely surviving wasn't enough, he had to excel beyond everyone around him. Only then could he gain everything he desired. He must never look back, always move forward, and choose the shortest path. Then, he slipped a handkerchief-wrapped object into Noah's arms. Noah stared at the man before him, struggling to comprehend his words. He was too young to grasp their meaning, yet these words planted a seed in his life. That day, Xianmi was still at her stall when regular customer Mr. Kim came to buy kimchi. He was also Korean and loved the kimchi Xianmi made. Xianmi complained to him about the recent cabbage shortage, how she couldn't find ingredients anymore. Xianmi's offhand remarks were light and casual, but Mr. Kim immediately expressed concern for Xianmi's future livelihood. Xianmi just smiled. All these years of hardship had taught her one truth: there's always a way out. Life goes on. Nearby, young Moses pretended to be profound, declaring Mr. Kim must be a spy. Children speak without reservation, but the word spy struck a nerve with Xianmi. She wouldn't forget why Isaac had been imprisoned. She immediately scolded Moses. No sooner had she spoken than dozens of fighter jets appeared over Osaka. Amidst the crowd, someone shouted, "Those are American bombers." People began fleeing in panic. But what fell from the planes were not bombs, they were leaflets, fluttering down from the sky. The leaflets bore a letter addressed to the Japanese people. The letter urged the Japanese populace to collectively petition the emperor to end this brutal war. If Japan did not surrender, The next thing to fall might not be leaflets. Xianmi's eyes held terror. She was just an ordinary person, struggling to survive in turbulent times. As the waves of history crashed over her, she felt like a startled bird. At that moment, she couldn't fathom how the situation could possibly worsen. How much worse could it get? After all, she was already struggling to afford even cabbage. Moses, innocent in his words, saw things with startling clarity. He told his mother, "The Americans are coming." Kyujin was sent to a factory in Nagasaki. In-suk and Xianmi, two women, relied on each other for survival. The household depended almost entirely on her kimchi sales to make ends meet. Their lives remained perpetually strained. At school, Moses was mocked by classmates for eating pig food due to his family's poor circumstances, but his cheerful nature shone through. He lifted his bowl onto the table and took a bite, then offered everyone a taste of each dish. His sincerity and courage turned all the mockery into a joke. The discrimination he faced also happened to Noah. Noah was going through adolescence. Kids this age are naturally sensitive and delicate. Classmates mocked Noah for sleeping in a pigsty. He wasn't as optimistic as Moses. He cared about what others thought. After school, he often went to the church to clean. This was his way of remembering his father. The current pastor at the church had formed a close bond with Noah, filling the void left by his father's absence. One day, Noah confided in the pastor about his school struggles. The pastor urged him to be more open-minded, explaining that in such times, everyone felt powerless. Since he lived here, he had to learn to accept it. The only way to escape this treatment was to stop being North Korean, then he wouldn't be singled out. Noah knew the pastor was right. This was the reality. Being North Korean was an original sin. But it wasn't just him. Even Gao Hansui stood near the apex of society yet remained shackled by his Korean identity. As a merchant, he donated vast supplies and maintained business ties with the military. Yet despite this, he still received no commensurate respect. Dining with Japanese officers, he had to wear a smile while enduring their insults toward Koreans. Those arrogant, contemptuous words left a bitter taste in Gao Hansui's ears. Two officers had been absent from the table for quite some time. His father-in-law tapped his hand, signaling him to slip out and gather intelligence. Under the cover of night, Gao Hansui overheard the most critical part. American forces were poised to bomb Osaka at any moment. This news instantly heightened his alertness. After all, Xianmi and Noah lived right here. As time passed, the war grew increasingly desperate. The nation was on the brink of total mobilization. Women and children were all summoned to the training grounds. Xianmi and the others were among the training ranks. Moses, the youngest, believed the propaganda that Americans were all villains and trained with exceptional zeal. A woman from the neighboring house greeted Xianmi. After training ended, Xianmi immediately approached her to chat. The woman, younger than Xianmi, struggled to raise her three young children. After Isaac's arrest, Xianmi and her brother's family relied solely on each other. But soon after, Kyujin was sent to a factory in Nagasaki to produce military supplies. With the war intensifying in recent years, wages had become nothing but empty promises, making life even harder. She now had only her last jar of kimchi left. If she sold that, she didn't know how they'd survive. The woman understood Xianmi. Her own situation wasn't much better. She suggested they could brew rice wine to sell on the black market. In times like these, survival was paramount. Xianmi hesitated. This was illegal, but waiting meant starvation, so she began brewing rice wine with her neighbor. They worked under cover of night, air raid sirens occasionally piercing the sky. They were used to it, their hands never stopping. The rice wine was ready. They had just loaded it onto the cart. When the woman's husband returned home, Xianmi had to push the cart out alone. But she didn't come back until very late. A frantic knock sounded at the door. In-suk opened it. The neighbor brought terrible news. The black market had been raided. Xianmi had been taken away. For In-suk and her two children, it was a bolt from the blue. Meanwhile, Xianmi sat in her cell, her heart in her throat. What would become of her children if anything happened to her? Yet the next day, a sudden turn of events unfolded. The prison guard came to announce each prisoner's final sentence. When it was Xianmi's turn, he merely glanced at her and released her to return home. Xianmi could scarcely believe it, but she hurried away nonetheless. Outside, Mr. Kim was waiting for her. She found it odd. Mr. Kim said nothing, only motioned for her to follow him. The car drove to a secluded courtyard, where she was led into a reception room. Turning around, the man before her was none other than Gao Hansui. The moment she saw him, a fleeting surprise flashed in Xianmi's eyes before she instantly understood. So Mr. Kim had been working for Gao Hansui all along. It was also Gao Hansui who had instructed Mr. Kim to secretly care for Xianmi and her children, especially Noah. He had summoned Xianmi today to warn her that this place was about to be bombed. The Americans intended to level all of Osaka, but Xianmi refused to leave. She wouldn't abandon her husband still imprisoned. He knew Xianmi couldn't be persuaded, because Xianmi had always been stubborn, yet he couldn't bear to leave Xianmi behind, nor his only son, Noah. Noah had always been top of his class at school, yet he remained perpetually gloomy. As he prepared to leave after school that day, his teacher detained him, unwilling to watch such a promising student waste away. The teacher urged him that with more effort, he could attend university, but Noah refused to leave. He wanted to stay and become a pastor like his father. Facing the stubborn youth, the teacher said little. Instead, he handed Noah practice exam papers for Waseda University's entrance test. Noah took the book and saw the name on the title page, only then realizing the teacher was also Korean. Meanwhile, in 1989 Osaka, everything was developing at breakneck speed. Everyone believed the prosperity would continue, until the shadow of economic crisis loomed overhead. The bubble was about to burst. Solomon remained optimistic, seeking investments everywhere. But Takuya, his former finance ministry superior, sabotaged him. No one dared help him. His business stalled. Yet Moses's pachinko parlor entered a second spring. The new arcade opened, and Solomon rushed back to celebrate. Moses looked especially energetic today. Understanding his son's struggles, he pulled out a 100 million yen check. He explained he'd secured a mortgage using the new store as collateral, intending to invest in his son. At such critical moments, only family stands by you. But Solomon remained consumed by the injustice of Takuya's treatment. While accompanying Xianmi to pick up a cake, trouble struck again. Xianmi had ordered a cake for 50 people. The shop assistant gave her one, barely enough for 5. Solomon immediately stepped in to argue for grandma, but the assistant's attitude was terrible. Not only did he refuse to admit his own mistake, he mocked Xianmi's Japanese as terrible. He implied her poor pronunciation caused the mix-up. He even sneered sarcastically that living here without knowing Japanese was unacceptable. That superiority complex, coming from a Japanese person, instantly set Solomon off. He'd had enough of discrimination. All his pent-up anger erupted right then and there. He started yelling back, "I was born here. I graduated from Yale. I make more in a day than you do in a month. Who do you think you are to look down on me?" Solomon's sudden outburst terrified Xianmi. His grandmother's voice snapped him back to reality. Realizing what he'd done, he practically fled in panic. He ran back to the arcade, staring blankly at his surroundings. Faced with his grandmother's concerned questions, he finally spoke his true feelings. It's too hard. So hard he felt he couldn't hold on much longer. Yet even then, he tore up the check, refusing his father's money, because what he wanted wasn't just money, it was a clean, decisive victory. But many years earlier, in Osaka of 1945, Xianmi faced a very real threat to her survival. The sky hung gray and heavy, the war growing ever more desperate. Conditions across Japan were dire. A thick, oppressive air of death hung over Osaka. Xianmi refused to leave. She would wait for her husband to return. Days passed until a man pushed open the door, his gaunt frame, his face unrecognizable. Noah was startled, until Insuk cried out that long-forgotten name, Isaac. He had finally come back. Learning Isaac had returned, Xianmi was overcome with emotion. After 7 years apart, they grasped each other's hands in joyful reunion. Yet all their words dissolved into silent tears streaming down their faces. Seeing Isaac so frail twisted her heart like a knife. She was determined to find a doctor for her husband. But Isaac was terminally ill and doctors were nowhere to be found. Xianmi's gaze burned with resolve. She composed herself and sought out Gao Hansui. Gao Hansui seemed unsurprised by this. He agreed to help find a doctor, but on one condition, regardless of whether Isaac survived. Xianmi must leave the city with the children. It appeared Isaac's release had been orchestrated by Gao Hansui. Xianmi had no choice but to agree. At home, Isaac asked Noah to summon the pastor. Insuk wanted to send a telegram to Kyujin in distant Nagasaki, telling him Isaac had returned home. Young Moses volunteered to take on the task. The telegraph operator confirmed the message with him. He took the paper slip. It contained only 9 words. Isaac is home. He is dying. For the first time since Moses could remember, he sought his father yet was about to lose him. His eyes dimmed, but he remained strong, holding back tears. Back home, Isaac's condition worsened. Moses sat by his side, reading storybooks to him. His greatest wish was for his father to recover. Isaac took the opportunity to teach Moses. He had grown up in a large house with many rooms, but he didn't miss the house itself, only the people who lived there. True wealth was being loved. Moses voiced his own question: why couldn't one have both wealth and love? Just then, Noah rushed back with the pastor, seeing the familiar Isaac. His expression turned grave. He dismissed everyone except Noah, facing the pastor. Isaac bluntly voiced his suspicion. "Did you report me?" Noah was stunned, but the pastor openly admitted it. He confessed his jealousy, how Isaac effortlessly won everyone's affection. He'd thought Isaac's arrest would bring him joy. Yet each day brought torment as he prayed incessantly for Isaac. But Isaac forgave him. Noah, watching, broke down. Why forgive him? Forgive someone who hurt you? It was all because of him that the family ended up like this. After the pastor left, Isaac told Noah, "Mercy is neither a gift nor a privilege. It was the price paid for living in this world." He had so much more he wanted to say. But in the end, only these words remained. No matter what happened, they were both his sons. In his final hours, Isaac strove to fulfill his duty as a father, teaching Noah and Moses by example. Seonmi returned with the doctor, but even the doctor could do nothing for Isaac. After a brief examination, he told Seonmi Isaac had only hours left. Seonmi froze. After waiting so long, she never imagined this would be the outcome. She could only passively accept fate. These final hours, she would spend with the husband she deeply loved. They lay facing each other, just as they had on their wedding day. Isaac apologized to Seonmi. He blamed himself for bringing her this fate. He could forgive others, but he could not forgive himself. Seonmi understood Isaac. No matter how the world changed, the man before her remained unchanged. He was forever the one who brought love and care to others. The world may shatter, but Isaac's goodness endured. Isaac closed his eyes peacefully. He was going to sleep soundly. Only this time, he would never wake again. After Isaac left, Seonmi told the children, "There will never be another man like your father in this world." Stepping outside, she could hold back no longer and finally sat on the steps, weeping. But in an era like this, what did one death matter? The relentless waves of the times crashed upon them, leaving Seonmi's family powerless to fight back. They faced life and death separations. Years later, what Solomon faced was not a matter of life and death. Yet it was still a battle for survival. Solomon secretly arranged to meet Takuya. He was truly at the end of his rope, seeking forgiveness, but the other clearly had no intention of sparing him, instead seeking to make an example of him, to show everyone who dared oppose him what became of Solomon. With no other options left, Solomon thought of the landlady. He told her about his recent ordeal and confessed that he had sought out Takeo himself. He had lost his mind during that time. They were both Koreans, yet hurting each other only played into others' hands. Solomon and the landlady shook hands and made peace. The landlady also casually mentioned a strange rumor about this plot from years ago. It seemed to have been a graveyard once. These words took on a completely different meaning to Solomon. He saw a new opportunity. He thought the landlady could sell the land to Takuya first. Then he would spread the news. The land's value would surely plummet. By then, Takuya, who'd taken out a loan to buy the land expecting appreciation, would be saddled with massive debt. These words pained the landlady deeply. How could Solomon exploit the dead for profit? But to Solomon, it was merely history that had nothing to do with him. These words enraged the landlady completely. Solomon's life had been largely free of hardship and suffering, yet precisely because of this, he always felt those around him looked down on him. The landlady didn't consider her past hardships a burden. On the contrary, she felt her life had been blessed. Though Solomon struggled to comprehend the older generation's mindset, his strength lay in sincerity. After an open-hearted conversation, the landlady agreed to sell the land. Solomon was thrilled and immediately shared the news with Takeo. The landlady would sell the land to Takuya, granting them a 10% commission. He would then spread rumors to drive down the land's value, and he was determined to make Takuya know that he was the one causing the disruption. Solomon's life took a new turn. Meanwhile, in 1945 Japan, his grandfather Isaac's body was being pushed into an incinerator. Suddenly, the air raid sirens blared. Under the night sky, the remaining people of Osaka fled in terror. Seonmi's family was among them. However, Gao Hansui appeared just in time to pick up Seonmi's family. This was also Gao Hansui's first encounter with Insuk. Seonmi only said he was a trusted friend. The two hurried home to pack their belongings. They loaded the children into Gao Hansui's vehicle. As the end drew near, people were herded like animals, struggling aimlessly for survival. Outside the car window, figures kept pounding on the glass, their eyes filled with despair and sorrow. For the first time, they realized they couldn't possibly sympathize with everyone. After a harrowing night, the car headed toward a remote rural area. Under the blazing sun, they found temporary safety. The car stopped before a small wooden hut on the plains. Inside, the dilapidation far exceeded Insuk's expectations. As a lady of good family, She had never lived in such a ramshackle place, but Gao Hansui told them they couldn't return home until the war ended. He would have Mr. Kim live with them to look after their daily needs. After all, Mr. Kim was a man. In-suk and Seonmi worried about gossip, yet they forgot what kind of world they lived in. Survival itself was a struggle. Gao Hanchue's warning, never harbor illusions about people in extreme circumstances, jolted Seonmi back to reality. His selfless help frightened her. Seonmi feared Noah wouldn't accept his true origins. 14 years had passed since she conceived Noah. She was no longer the young girl washing clothes by the river. Living in the countryside meant farm work was inevitable. That day, Seonmi and In-suk were transplanting rice seedlings in the field. Nearby, a peasant woman whispered gossip about them. Mr. Kim immediately stepped in to defend the two. This act filled In-suk with profound gratitude. Humans possess remarkable adaptability. In-suk no longer felt as repelled as she had initially. Even Noah and Moses, being young, quickly grew fond of the place. The playful Moses even wished to stay here forever. Gao Hansui frequently visited, bringing gifts for the two children. Seeing Gao Hansui and Noah grow increasingly close, Seonmi felt a growing sense of unease. The next day, while Seonmi was working, Moses came to report that someone had stolen eggs. Mr. Kim decided to take the two children to stake out the thief. In-suk was curious and wanted to go along to see for herself. That night, the four of them lay in wait outside. It was very late, but they found nothing. Taking advantage of the lull, Noah asked Mr. Kim about his past with Gao Hansui. Mr. Kim told Noah that back when he worked at the docks, he often got into fights. His family had owned a farm, but later their land was confiscated. The family fell on hard times, and his younger siblings were taken in by other relatives. His mother wept night after night and no longer loved his father as she once did. After his father passed away, he left home, carrying resentment toward the world. Just as the story ended, the egg thief arrived. The adults fled, but the children were caught. Unexpectedly, the world really is small. The child standing before them was none other than the one who had bullied Noah at school. Mr. Kim placed the decision in Noah's hands, but Noah chose to let him go. He remembered Isaac's parting words, "Mercy is accepting everything." Back home, In-suk tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The heat was unbearable, her forehead glistening with sweat, so she slipped out alone, heading to the riverbank to wash up, only to find Mr. Kim standing there by himself. An unusual feeling stirred within her heart. Solomon, on his end, perked up after the situation took a turn. He first returned to his former company and disclosed the landowner grandmother's intention to sell the property to his former boss. The boss had been transferred here due to a mistake managing client assets, but he believed he'd been framed and wanted to return. Going home was the bargaining chip in his deal with Solomon, as long as he agreed to cooperate by first granting Takuya a loan. And then, once the news spread, aggressively pursue loan collection. Solomon would find a way to get his superior back home. After Solomon left, his female colleague Kumiko took his position, becoming the company's second-in-command. Solomon wasn't angry at all. Instead, he directly stated that she was the one who should take over here, because she was more diligent and capable. But no matter how capable she was, she could never truly take over this American's company, because her gender and lineage had already decided her fate. Solomon's heartfelt words moved Kumiko. Kumiko then took the initiative to invite him to dinner. Solomon didn't refuse but set one condition: he would choose the restaurant. He brought Kumiko to a roadside food stall. The place was cramped and the hygiene left much to be desired. Yet Solomon showed no embarrassment. He opened up to her directly about his current reality. He refused to pretend, especially before a woman he liked. He was smart enough not to stay stuck in a rut. If Kumiko chose to be with him, she'd have to accept his current reality. If she couldn't, he understood. Kumiko offered no response, merely raising her glass with a gentle smile, her actions speaking louder than words. Solomon remained convinced that though he had nothing now, life would eventually turn around. In a parallel timeline during wartime, his father, Moses, was crafting weapons on the farm. Born in an era of conflict, Moses had never witnessed societal prosperity, yet he cherished this place for its freedom. As the eldest son, Noah had long embraced the responsibility of leadership. He had befriended the classmate who'd once stolen eggs, and the boy had sincerely apologized for his past actions. For the first time, Noah felt the power of kindness. Seonmi was working in the fields. Gao Hanchue's car pulled up nearby. A woman dressed in traditional Korean attire stepped out. Seonmi recognized her instantly and sprinted toward her. She had longed for that familiar figure almost every moment. Gao Hansui had brought Seonmi's mother. Mother and daughter reunited after years apart. Reunion was the greatest luxury in those war-torn years. As they gathered around the table, ready to savor a hearty reunion meal, Gao Hansui suddenly walked in. The mother was deeply grateful to Gao Hansui, for it was through him that she could reunite with Xianmi. Xianmi, unusually, invited Gao Hansui to sit at the table. What had transpired between Gao Hansui and Xianmi? The adults all understood the unspoken history, yet none spoke ill of them. For now, the greatest happiness was simply being together as a family. After dinner, everyone retired for the night, but Xianmi remained awake. Finding the room stifling, she decided to step outside for some air. Just as she stepped out, she encountered Gao Hansui. He was discussing business matters with a foreman. Xianmi thanked him for his help regarding her mother. Gao Hansui suddenly took an interest in teaching Xianmi to drive. On her first attempt, the car accidentally got stuck in a large ditch. The two pushed the car together until it finally returned to the road. They couldn't help but kiss each other passionately. Gao Hansui confessed his feelings to Xianmi. He hoped to be with her again. His words instantly sobered Xianmi. She pushed him away, even though Isaac had already left. Back home, she revealed the entire truth to her mother. Gao Hansui was the child's father. Her mother could only warn Xianmi never to let Noah know, never to get entangled again. That evening, Noah was also taken by classmates to the forest to see fireflies, but just as they were enjoying the sight, they suddenly heard noises outside. Hiding behind a large tree, they witnessed Gao Hansui beating a supervisor who had stolen something. Having just been rejected by Xianmi, Gao Hansui vented nearly all his fury on the man. Punch after punch landed without mercy. Hidden in the shadows, Noah witnessed Gao Hansui's brutal, bloodthirsty side. Completely terrified, he turned and fled. His classmates called his name from behind. That single cry of Noah instantly threw Gao Hansui into disarray. If there was anyone whose feelings he cared about most, Noah would undoubtedly be first. Due to the intense heat, In-suk went to the riverbank and encountered Mr. Kim. She remembered how he had rescued her from the overseer's harassment while she worked in the fields during the day. Mr. Kim felt a pang of emotion. He and In-suk belonged to different social classes, yet now, because of the war, they lived on the same farm. Neither knew if they would survive to return home. Hearing these words, In-suk's eyes filled with sorrow. Yet this sorrow touched a dormant chord in Mr. Kim's heart. After that night, a subtle current of affection began to flow between In-suk and Mr. Kim, but neither dared to break through that thin veil of unspoken feelings. After a spring of hard work, the harvest season finally arrived. Everyone bustled about, filling the granaries to overflowing. That evening, they gathered by the river to float lanterns and pray for blessings. Yet the next dawn brought the urgent clang of gongs. Rushing out, they discovered the granary ablaze. A year's harvest, their labor's fruit, vanished in an instant, consumed by flames. In-suk collapsed. She turned and fled into the forest. Mr. Kim, seeing this, immediately gave chase. Mr. Kim didn't know how to explain any of this. He only knew life comes but once, it must not be wasted. In-suk crouched down, leaning into Mr. Kim's embrace as she wept in despair. The shadow of war always hung over their heads. War changed so much. Her endurance, her grievances all finally calmed in Mr. Kim's lingering kiss. They broke through that forbidden barrier between them. Two long lonely hearts drew close at last. In-suk was a gentle woman. She had endured too long in terror, alone. Xianmi was different. Her two sons had always been the driving force of her life. Only years later, as everyone around her drifted further away, could she feel the same loneliness as In-suk? In her later years, Moses was busy running the arcade. Solomon was in Tokyo, preparing for his comeback. She was almost always alone. That day, she came to the park and happened upon an elderly man of similar age. The man was also alone. He had previously witnessed Solomon arguing with a supermarket clerk, feeding pigeons. He spotted Xianmi and waved her over. He casually handed her some breadcrumbs, inviting her to join him. Yet Xianmi couldn't sit long before apologizing again for Solomon's actions. She had always believed Solomon was truly fortunate. After all, he hadn't endured past turmoil or faced life or death struggles. But the old man told Xianmi that ordinary people's lives were always difficult, no matter the era. His words comforted Xianmi. She began to try and understand Solomon's situation. That evening, back home, she called Solomon but couldn't get through. Growing concerned, she decided to go to Tokyo to see him directly. Xianmi left on a whim and soon rang the doorbell at Solomon's home. Dressed in a suit, Solomon was somewhat surprised to see his grandmother standing outside. Sure enough, as soon as Xianmi entered, the doorbell rang again. This time, Kumiko stood outside. It turned out the two had a date. Meanwhile, through Solomon's careful maneuvering, the land owned by the landlady grandmother, now a cemetery, had made the newspapers. However, Kumiko was unaware that Solomon was the instigator. Seonmi invited Kumiko in to have dinner together. Kumiko accepted and even helped Seonmi prepare the meal. Solomon also received good news. Due to the media coverage, the hotel acquisition plan was being withdrawn. Everything was progressing steadily according to Solomon's plan. The next step was the most crucial, directly demanding loan repayment to leave Takuya penniless. Solomon was in high spirits. Kumiko also chatted with Seonmi. She recalled how her father rarely came home when she was young, so she often helped her mother prepare dinner. Kumiko shared Solomon's current predicament with Seonmi. Everyone was waiting for him to fall from his high position just as they once had, but Solomon's unwavering resolve surprised everyone, earning their respect. Even she found renewed strength to keep moving forward through his actions. A simple dinner was prepared, and the three ate happily. Over the meal, Kumiko revealed to Solomon that she was currently assisting a loan company with its IPO. However, some of the company's operations were questionable. The project was still confidential at this stage. Seonmi also learned from their conversation about the landowner grandmother selling her property. Though Solomon mentioned she received a substantial sum, Seonmi knew the grandmother must have been reluctant, and an inexpressible sadness settled in her heart. Back at the hotel, Seonmi sat alone by the bed. Her frail figure was reflected in the large floor-to-ceiling window. Out of boredom, she called the elderly woman. Sensing her mood, the elderly woman offered comfort. "Anyway, we don't have much time left. Why not let go and live according to your heart?" At dawn, Solomon stood on the balcony gazing at the golf course across the way. A knowing smile touched his lips as a plan began to take shape in his mind. Everything he desired would be obtained, bit by bit. To support him, his superior planned to initiate loan collection efforts, but was stopped by Kumiko. She argued that Takuya had been a major client with impeccable credit. It would be wrong to kick him while he was down. Solomon approached Takeo to share his plan. He anticipated Takuya would sell the land quickly, then they could acquire it cheaply and build a golf course there. He'd already mapped out how the course would operate. But the next moment, his plan fell apart. His boss arrived to inform him the company wouldn't pursue the loan collection because Kumiko had consistently spoken on Takuya's behalf. Solomon made their romantic relationship explicit. The boss was somewhat shocked, and Takeo agreed to the golf course proposal. The heavy task of persuading Kumiko now fell squarely on Solomon's shoulders, but the boss didn't believe Solomon could accomplish the mission. First, he doubted Kumiko's feelings for Solomon were genuine. Second, he wanted to see if Solomon could truly persuade her. Late into the night, Solomon dragged his weary body home. Kumiko had fallen asleep on the sofa, the TV still on. Solomon carried her to bed and told Kumiko today was the highlight of his life, though he didn't elaborate why. He looked at Kumiko, unsure how to broach the subject, to persuade her to abandon her stance, to give up what she believed was right. Burdened by these conflicting thoughts, they fell asleep with their own concerns, but at least they knew what they were facing. In Nagasaki, 1945, many remained oblivious to their impending fate. Looking back now, we know 2 atomic bombs were about to be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yet at that very moment, everyone in Nagasaki's factories was working feverishly. Kyujin was among them. On August 1st, like everyone else, he finished his day's work as usual and headed to the delivery room to collect a parcel sent from home. Inside was a letter from Insuk. He missed his family dearly too. August 3rd brought another day of monotonous, tedious labor. Because he was Korean, he also served as a Korean interpreter. After work on August 4th, he went for his customary cup of sake, sitting with several Korean boys. One boy told him his father had passed away. He'd been sent here a year ago. The boy felt pessimistic about the future, but Kyujin believed the war would surely end. He would definitely return home. August 8th was exactly like yesterday. Black smoke billowed from the factory's tall chimney. News of the attack on Hiroshima was being broadcast. While sweeping, the boy secretly took a tool without anyone noticing, but Kyujin happened to catch sight of it. On August 9th, the emperor's envoy came to inspect the factory. The boy raised the hidden file and charged forward, stabbing at the man, but unfortunately, he failed, because at the critical moment, Kyujin stepped in to stop him. At 11:02 that morning, an atomic bomb named Fat Man detonated over Nagasaki. A white light enveloped the entire city. Then all was settled. The war ended almost instantly. Soon, Japan surrendered unconditionally under the pressure of the situation. Kyujin was fortunate. Just as he was about to be loaded into a prisoner transport truck on suspicion of attempting to assassinate the emperor's aide, he survived the violent explosion. Though it left him disfigured beyond recognition, at least he could go home. He struggled to open his eyes, finding Gao Hansui beside him. The man told him he was fortunate the truck had shielded him, granting him a narrow escape. The war was over, but Korea was lost forever. Post-war chaos reigned outside, leaving him no choice but to remain on the farm. Yet Kyujin was perceptive. The moment he saw Gao Hansui, he guessed the man's identity. Before Kyujin, Gao Hansui made no pretense, openly admitting he was Noah's biological father. Tension instantly flared between them. To protect his brother's reputation, Kyujin lay in bed and issued threats, but Gao Hansui said nothing, only picking up a mirror and urging him to see his own reflection clearly. Though he had saved Kyujin, he cared little for Kyujin's life or death. Everything he had done was for Seonmi and Noah, yet Noah's relationship with him began to slowly drift apart. Ever since witnessing his violence that day, Noah carried a deep shadow within. Gao Hansui naturally felt bitter, yet he offered no explanation, leaving only time to heal the rift. Though Kyujin returned, this ordeal only intensified his rage and paranoia. His physical wounds twisted his soul. He frequently lashed out at In-suk. The war ended, and they left the mountain cabin to return to the city. But the post-war world was a wasteland. All of Osaka lay in ruins. American soldiers rolled in tanks and took up positions. Moses and Noah watched the scene unfold and realized the Americans weren't as terrifying as they'd imagined. They even gave Moses a pair of glasses. Kyujin also noticed the ambiguous feelings between In-suk and Mr. Kim. Time moved to 1950. Noah and Moses had grown up. Their family home had been rebuilt. Mr. Kim still came by to help from time to time. The atmosphere between In-suk and him remained ambiguous. Osaka had regained its former bustle. To make ends meet, Seonmi started selling snacks again. With her mother's help, she had her own little stall. Her dream was to open a restaurant. Noah's grades remained excellent as he prepared for university entrance exams. Their lives were gradually improving. Besides attending school, Noah took on a part-time job delivering newspapers. He developed a fondness for a girl who worked at the tofu shop. He often visited her home to buy tofu. Mr. Kim regularly updated Gao Hansui on Noah's progress. Arranged by Gao Hansui, he continued living with Seonmi's family. This situation tormented Mr. Kim. His feelings for In-suk were painfully obvious. Watching the person he loved day after day, unable to be with her, left him utterly helpless. Gao Hansui understood his pain and made him a promise. Once Noah got into university, she would arrange for him to leave, to prepare for the exams. Noah was now barely sleeping at all. Seonmi felt heartbroken for him. A fleeting moment of regret even crossed her mind. If she hadn't refused Gao Hansui, perhaps her son wouldn't be working himself so hard. But Noah insisted they didn't need charity to live. They could build the life they wanted with their own hands. Seonmi watched him and thought that though he was Gao Hansui's son, he resembled Isaac more. Gao Hansui commanded respect outside, yet at home he too had to defer to his father-in-law. That day when he returned, his father-in-law was courting a Liberal Party leader. The man saw him and immediately mocked his ties to Americans. They looked down on Americans, and naturally, they looked down on Koreans too. They even discriminated against his heritage right in front of Gao Hansui. His father-in-law, of course, had his own ambitions. Now, in the post-war scramble for power, he hoped to cultivate his own faction to rise to prominence. He didn't care about Gao Hansui's feelings and promised the man he would support the Liberal Party unconditionally. Gao Hansui, however unwilling, had no choice but to endure it. Fortunately, he had another source of comfort. Now, Noah's university entrance exam was the foremost priority. Time flew by, and before they knew it, the day of the results arrived. Everyone was tense, anxiously awaiting the outcomes. Noah was nervous too. He pushed through the crowd, scanning the boards for his number. Finally, he found it. He had been accepted into the prestigious Waseda University. He brought this good news to Seonmi. The whole family rejoiced, except Moses, who felt overwhelmed just looking at the university course schedule. Yet the joy vanished instantly when Noah saw the figure on the acceptance letter: 2,400 yen, not including tuition and living expenses. This was an astronomical sum for Seonmi's family. Grandmother suggested borrowing from Gao Hansui, but Noah refused, insisting on working his way through college. This broke Seonmi's heart. She reassured Noah, promising she'd find a solution. She temporarily abandoned her dream of opening a shop and withdrew all her savings. Noah's tuition was finally covered, but Noah couldn't bear to see Seonmi suffer. He no longer wanted to attend university. After all, it would mean leaving home for years, and he simply couldn't bring himself to do it. Noah's decision deeply saddened Seonmi. Unable to persuade him, she had no choice but to inform Gao Hansui. Yet for Gao Hansui, all their hard work had been for Noah's future. Noah must see the world clearly. To escape poverty and build a better future, college was the only path. He himself faced problems too. The American was leaving, and his business would suffer afterward, though he'd prepared long ago. The black market had already been taken over. His father-in-law approached him days ago, demanding his granddaughter be married to the Liberty Party leader. Gao Hansui refused to sacrifice his daughter, but his father-in-law laid bare the truth. All these years, he had failed as a husband and father. He had barely raised his daughter. For him, only that hidden life mattered most. His father-in-law even threatened Xianmi's family's safety to pressure Gao Hansui. Gao Hansui had no choice but to compromise for now. Since his injury, Qujin refused to leave his room, consumed by self-pity. That night, In-suk washed clothes while Mr. Kim came to help. In-suk briefly held Mr. Kim's hand just a fleeting moment. Unbeknownst to them, Qujin lurked in the shadows upstairs, watching everything. As the World War ended, Korea descended into civil war. Koreans drifting in Osaka gathered together to fight for their rights. At that time, the name Korea represented the unified nation they held as the true orthodoxy in their hearts. Xianmi, born in Yangdo, Busan, might later be called a Korean, like Mr. Kim, born in the north. Guarding the homeland of Korea was his deepest desire. He wanted to return to defend his country, but could he leave In-suk behind? He was still struggling. He was torn between the greater duty to his country and his love. Solomon now faced the ultimate choice between his lover and his career. Everything had proceeded smoothly until now. Unexpectedly, Kumiko became the sole obstacle. Just as he was at a loss, Takeo had someone deliver photographs to Solomon. The photos showed Kumiko with another man. Solomon stared at the images, his eyes filled with disbelief. The messenger delivering the photos casually reminded Solomon, if he didn't resolve this matter quickly, Takeo would surely abandon him. Pressure from all sides had driven him to the edge of a cliff. He called Kumiko to confront her, deliberately inviting her out for dinner that evening. Sure enough, Kumiko made excuses, claiming she was busy. Now Solomon was almost certain Takeo's words were true, so he began his own detective work, tailing Kumiko after work. At the restaurant, he witnessed the scene from the photos. Kumiko was dining and laughing with another man. Even the man's parents were present at the table. In that instant, his emotions were complex. There was the pain of betrayal, but perhaps also relief that he could finally set aside feelings and focus purely on business. The moment Kumiko looked up, she spotted Solomon in the distance. Her expression immediately hardened. That evening, Kumiko came to Solomon's home. She explained that their families were old acquaintances and both sets of parents believed they should be together, but she disagreed. She simply didn't know how to tell her parents. Her excuses now felt hollow. More importantly, Solomon had already made his decision. She tried to win him back, but Solomon didn't respond. Instead, he demanded she swear never to betray him. This oath felt too heavy. Kumiko could only promise she would try her best, but her ambiguous attitude was unacceptable to Solomon. And so, this budding romance ended before it truly began. Kumiko turned to leave. Solomon cut straight to the point, asking her to help collect Takuya's loan. A flicker of shock crossed Kumiko's eyes. Then it dawned on her, the rumor about the underground remains had been spread by Solomon. This struck her as unbelievable. Had she fallen for someone so ruthless? But Solomon no longer cared about the means. He was nearly cornered. He needed a decisive victory to establish his reputation. He needed to survive in Tokyo. Kumiko wrestled internally, but she knew she couldn't do it. It violated her professional ethics, and she had to stop Solomon. The former lovers now stood firmly on opposite sides. Kumiko was the company's second in command. With her opposition, her boss alone couldn't persuade the board to demand repayment. Solomon hesitated barely at all. Before revealing to his superior the financial issues Kumiko had confided in him that night about the company preparing for its IPO, he urged his boss to seize this opportunity to bring Kumiko down. To win, he would stop at nothing. His superior acted swiftly. Days later, Kumiko was abruptly summoned to the director's office. The boss opened by accusing her of leaking critical client information. Though no actual losses occurred, it caused significant reputational damage to the company. The moment those words were spoken, Kumiko instantly thought of Solomon. Disappointed, she offered no defense. The director told Kumiko that as a woman, she should exercise greater caution than others. Kumiko pleaded for one last chance. Instead, the director announced her immediate dismissal. Returning to her office, she closed the door and wept bitterly. She had poured so much effort into reaching this point, yet simply because she was a woman, everything was stripped away so easily. With Takuya out of the picture, the loan payments began to pile up. Everything was unfolding exactly as Solomon had planned. Even Takeo began to see him in a new light. But was Solomon truly happy? Only he knew the answer. Xianmi, however, had been enjoying herself lately. She started going on dates with the elderly. They sampled many unfamiliar foods and shared stories of their youth, comforting each other's loneliness. To thank the elderly man for his hospitality, she specially bought a wallet from a store and personally picked up a pen to scribble his name on a card. That evening, Moses returned home to find the wrapped gift box on the table with Xianmi's handwritten name. Out of a businessman's caution, he feared this person might be using Xianmi. He called a private investigator to look into the man's background. The investigation took time, but Xianmi spent nearly every day with the elderly gentleman. One day, while planting flowers together, he casually mentioned a lifelong dream to visit America. His financial situation, however, left him unable to afford it. Deeply moved, Xianmi handed over her life savings. At her age, money no longer mattered. If this money could help an elderly man fulfill his dream, it would be a virtuous deed. The old man invited Xianmi to join him on the trip. Unbeknownst to her, Moses had already uncovered the man's background. This elderly man indeed possessed little wealth, lived largely alone, and had served in the war. It was common for that generation to have fought in wars, yet he had been brought before a tribunal. This meant he had participated in, or even orchestrated, large-scale massacres. This discovery only deepened Moses's concern for Xianmi. How could he possibly tell her? Time rewound to 1945. Noah still refused to attend school, insisting on working part-time at the telegraph office. That afternoon, Xianmi came personally to pick Noah up from work. Together, they walked to the tofu shop. Xianmi knew Noah secretly harbored feelings for a girl there. She suspected the girl at the tofu shop was one reason Noah couldn't bear to leave. To Noah, Osaka was his home. Xianmi gently reminded Noah of her own journey, how she'd come to Osaka alone with Isaac. The hardships she faced then far outweighed his current struggles, and Osaka wasn't her true home either. Her heart's homeland remained only that place across the sea. Noah was destined for a wider world. He couldn't stay trapped here forever. She hoped he'd go to Tokyo for university. Isaac, now gone, would surely want the same. Xianmi's earnest words finally sank in. He was a sensible boy, unwilling to disappoint her. Deep down, he had always known where his future lay. He wanted to become like his father, a person who could emit a faint glow to warm others. He finally decided to attend university. This became a major sensation throughout the entire Korean district. Xianmi held a farewell ceremony for Noah. Everyone came to see him off. Moses was unusually animated, while Mr. Kim remained deeply troubled. He and Gao Hansui had made a prior agreement. Once Noah left for Tokyo, it would be his turn to depart. Gao Hansui also arrived that day, dressed in a pristine white suit, immaculate as when he first met Xianmi years ago. He took out a small silk pouch and handed it to Noah. Inside lay the very same golden pocket watch. Xianmi watched all this from afar, her eyes brimming with complex emotions. She didn't know whether to feel joy or sorrow. Neighbors and acquaintances were all invited over. Everyone raised their glasses together, celebrating Noah stepping into a new future. But beneath Gao Hanshui's polished exterior, he was also facing his own struggles. Their black market business had been snatched by rivals, resulting in significant losses. Though his father-in-law had entrusted him with overseeing the subway construction project, he had also decided to push forward with his daughter's marriage and forbidden him, as her father, from attending. While he hadn't devoted excessive attention to his daughter, he couldn't stand idly by while she was treated as a pawn in a political marriage. He simply hadn't figured out how to handle the situation properly. Soon, the day of Noah's departure arrived. Noah urged Moses to take good care of the family. Moses dismissed it casually. Noah spoke as if he might never return. His offhand remark would later prove prophetic. Noah worried about Moses' future. Moses, however, was optimistic, sharing a grand dream, but his deepest reason for wanting to go to America was his belief that he would never face discrimination there. That evening, the entire family gathered to pray for Noah's safe journey. The next day, Jean, unusually, came downstairs. The air suddenly grew still. He took a bite of rice, then casually found fault with the saltiness and started lashing out at Insuk. No one dared speak. Moses couldn't stand it anymore. He stepped in and confronted him directly. "How long do you plan to keep this up? Your injuries from the explosion weren't our fault. Why are you dumping all your emotions on us?" Others tried to intervene, but Noah sided with Moses. He believed his uncle needed a push to re-enter life, so the two decided to help Jean step outside. But he hadn't left home in 5 years. He couldn't face it all. Knowing he couldn't stay trapped, he finally mustered the courage to walk out. They took him to the baseball field, where he witnessed children's courage and strength. Jean was deeply moved. For the first time in 5 years, he smiled genuinely. He had finally conquered his inner fears. Xianmi's daytime worries didn't escape Gao Hanshui's notice. That evening, He sought her out specifically to reveal his true purpose in giving the watch. He had given the watch to Noah because that timepiece had once saved both their lives. She saw it as a blessing. Noah had grown up. She felt completely at ease now. Her daughter's marriage was her biggest headache. After saying this, Xianmi prepared to leave. Gao Hansui suddenly called out to her from behind. He brought up their days by the river long ago. He felt they had been truly happy then. But back then, he was too young, his heart slowly decaying. He had missed so much, and he regretted it to this day. Xianmi replied that if something was rotten, it had to be cut away bit by bit. He thanked her anyway, then turned and walked into the darkness. Xianmi accompanied Noah onto the train bound for Tokyo. Noah gazed out the window, his eyes filled with hope for the future. He had arrived at the next station in his life, Waseda University. Tokyo was different from Osaka, bustling and prosperous. Towering academic buildings stood before him. These were structures neither had ever seen before. Though Gao Hansui didn't personally see Noah off, she had long prepared a grand gift for him. A large leather suitcase bearing his name was carried out by the dorm attendant, drawing curious glances from onlookers. Watching Noah now, Xianmi thought of her own father. He had always hoped she would soar higher. Though she hadn't taken flight herself, Noah had reached a broader horizon, and she was happy for him. She too yearned to know how vast this world truly was. Mother and son embraced tightly. She buried all her reluctance deep within. After Noah left for school, Mr. Kim gained his freedom. He joined the North Korean resistance and planned to return to the battlefield. As he packed his belongings to leave, he encountered Kyujin. He expressed deep gratitude to Kyujin for welcoming him into their family. Though Kyujin didn't understand his decision, he respected it. He realized this might be why his wife loved Mr. Kim. Yet at that moment, he wished Mr. Kim would stay. He loved his wife and didn't want to be her prison. He hoped she could have a better life. The ultimate expression of love is letting go. But this letting go came far too late. Mr. Kim wouldn't take advantage of the situation. He left with his luggage. As he stepped out, he happened to meet In-suk. A last shred of hope lingered in his heart. He told her Kyujin was willing to set her free. Would she come with him? But In-suk carried an unresolved burden in her heart. She always believed that her past relationship with Mr. Kim had broken the vows she'd made, leading to her husband's injury. This kind-hearted woman had shouldered the suffering of war onto herself. She could never again accept Mr. Kim's love. Even though she deeply loved him too, she prayed for him to survive, even if it meant living in a world without her. Gao Hansui also began his own plan. He could tolerate his father-in-law obstructing his career path, but he could not tolerate his father-in-law using his daughter's marriage as leverage and threatening the safety of Xianmi and Noah. So on an ordinary evening, he sent men to kill his father-in-law. He watched silently through a pane of glass. Entering university, Noah entered the happiest time of his life. He witnessed the clash of diverse ideas. His thoughtful and profound remarks successfully won the favor of Mi-jeong, the class beauty. The two became a couple, inseparable on campus. Everything in Osaka seemed to drift further and further away from him. Moses also discovered his own passion. He displayed exceptional talent at pinball, always walking away with a full prize, until one day, the owner discovered Moses had been cheating to win more marbles. Xianmi was summoned. She humbly apologized to the owner, promising to compensate for the losses and urging Moses to focus on his studies. The owner, however, forgave him and offered to take Moses in, while also advising Xianmi to face reality. It was clear Moses wasn't cut out for academics. Xianmi worried deeply about Moses' future. After all, in her eyes, the arcade hardly counted as a wholesome environment. Yet for Moses, it seemed the only path forward. Noah and Mi-jeong both loved literature. Mi-jeong was a wealthy heiress. Noah possessed an understanding of life Mi-jeong could never truly grasp. It was precisely this that drew her deeply to him. They were inseparable. Noah catered to her every whim. With one exception, Noah never brought Mi-jeong along when dining with his mysterious benefactor. That benefactor was none other than Gao Hansui. He dined with him once a week without fail. This evening, he arrived punctually as usual. Upon entering, Gao Hansui was discussing funding with the Liberty Party leader. He had taken his father-in-law's place. The leader who once looked down on him now set aside his arrogance for the sake of immense wealth. Noah had seen him before often in the newspapers. The man asked Noah what his dream was. Gao Hansui beat Noah to the answer: politics. But that wasn't Noah's ambition. His dream was to become a teacher, to be like Isaac, imparting knowledge and guiding students. He wanted to forge his own path. This altruistic spirit was incomprehensible to the ambitious Gao Hansui. As they spoke, a knock suddenly sounded at the door. It was Mi-jeong. Noah was stunned. How had she found this place? No one answered his question. The next moment, Mi-jeong lied directly to Gao Hansui, claiming Noah had invited her because of Mi-jeong's father. the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Cao Hansui even pulled out a chair for her himself. Once seated, the two discussed Noah's future right in front of him, yet no one asked Noah if he even wanted that future. It was Gao Hansui who had initially opposed his daughter's political marriage. Back at school, Noah snapped at Mi-jeong for the first time. He felt manipulated. He finally voiced what had been bottled up inside him all along. She was only with him because of his North Korean identity. That way, she could gain more attention. Mi-jeong didn't care what others thought of her. She scoffed that only Noah would let others define him. But the next moment, Mi-jeong voiced her inner suspicion. Gao Hansui was Noah's father. This conjecture was wildly bold, yet it struck a nerve deep within Noah. He violently grabbed Mi-jeong's neck, his rage boiling over in an instant, because this was the one truth he dreaded facing most. Outside, a torrential downpour raged. He dashed through the rain, leaving school behind, heading straight for the hotel where Gao Hansui stayed. He was determined to ask Gao Hansui directly, was he really his father? But after a brief hesitation, Gao Hansui gave a definitive answer. Gao Hansui poured a glass of wine and recounted his past with Xianmi. Noah refused to accept this. He couldn't bear the thought of his father being such a violent man. Gao Hansui was overjoyed, for the long-held secret had finally seen the light of day. He reveled in the joy of their reunion as father and son. He believed Noah shared the same greedy blood flowing through his veins. Noah would surely accept it all with composure. He just needed time to process it. But this truth was too brutal for Noah to bear. Isaac had been the father he'd known his entire life. Isaac's influence on him was simply too profound. Noah returned home late at night to see Xianmi once. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned and left immediately. Before leaving, he urged Xianmi to take good care of herself. After Noah departed, Xianmi stood frozen in place. Minutes later, an indescribable, searing pain overwhelmed her. She snapped to attention and rushed out, but Noah was already gone. She mobilized many people to search for him, even seeking out Gao Hansui in the dead of night. Yet, there was still no trace of Noah. In the 1989 timeline, after much internal struggle, Moses decided to reveal everything about the old man to Xianmi. He showed her the news report, suggesting the man might have been after their family's wealth. He described the atrocities the man had committed during the Holocaust. Xianmi didn't react with shock, but with profound sadness. Her sorrow wasn't about the old man's identity. It was about why Moses could have a relationship. Why could Solomon have a girlfriend while she couldn't? Why could Moses spend money on his girlfriend? Why, when it came to her, did he accuse others of being after money? All these years alone had left her profoundly lonely. Everyone she had ever loved had eventually drifted away from her, one by one. After the Takuya matter was settled, Solomon had finally established a foothold in Tokyo. His golf course would soon break ground. He had obtained everything he desired. He had finally secured his place at the table at the golf course's pre-sale event. When confronted with questions about whether the real estate market would decline, Solomon chose to give a dishonest answer. He wove a fantasy for everyone, a fantasy that Japan would surpass the United States to become the world's largest economy. Using false lies to mask his own desire to profit from the situation, Solomon was now at the peak of his life. His boss even quit his original company intending to work at Takeo's casino in Macau to earn more money. Solomon felt fortunate, looking back now and believing everything had been destined. Without those earlier setbacks, he wouldn't have gained this opportunity. The young Solomon didn't understand the cost of failure. He thought he was merely chasing wealth. But when news of Takuya's suicide appeared on TV, he was still shocked. He never imagined his actions could completely shatter another person's will to live. Moses, uneasy after his son suddenly repaid a large loan for him, traveled to Tokyo to visit. He happened to overhear his son's boastful remarks at a golf course press conference. Unable to hide his disappointment, he turned and left the venue. Unconcerned with the thunderous applause behind him, he walked straight into Takeo's office. The tense atmosphere made it clear they seemed to have known each other for a long time. Moses demanded Takeo stay away from his son, but Takeo refused, insisting Solomon would make him a fortune. Moses grew agitated, bluntly stating Takeo had already taken too much from him. Their connection ran deep. Later in their conversation, Moses mentioned a man, Takeo's grandfather. He claimed he'd never sought to compete for his grandfather's affection. If Takeo dared touch Solomon this time, he would show no mercy. What had truly happened back then? What grudges and entanglements bound them? Why did Takeo, with his vast influence, appear somewhat fearful of Moses? Their conversation abruptly ended there. Meanwhile, Xianmi walked the streets, deeply troubled by the old man's report. She was a kind woman whose core remained unchanged despite enduring countless hardships. Facing the old man again, She laid everything bare. The old man's face darkened. He admitted he had once been a murderer, but he told Xianmi that everything he did back then was because someone had told him the American soldiers had come to violate his wife and occupy his homeland. So he believed their words. He was too young then, and the war had brought hunger and suffering that had robbed him of his ability to think. He carried out the military order and massacred the American prisoners of war. Accompanying that massacre order was a phrase, "Forget everything," yet he couldn't forget. To this day, memories still corrode him. For the rest of his life, he repented for his sins. His sincere words moved Xianmi. Xianmi said nothing more. She understood how war dehumanizes people, so she took out the gift she had prepared earlier, though she couldn't completely let go of her resentment. She wished him well for the future. Time rewound to that era. The war had just ended. Everything was a fresh start. After dropping out of school, Moses took a job at a marble arcade. There, he encountered someone extraordinary. The man had brought his grandson and bought 2 entire boxes of marbles. His commanding presence caught Moses's attention. Yet, at that moment, their paths had not yet crossed. Several weeks had passed since Noah's disappearance. Gao Hanshui's people searched everywhere, yet found no trace of Noah. A grown man had vanished as if he'd evaporated into thin air. Xianmi blamed herself. She recalled Noah's farewell that night as he left home. Even as he departed, he tried to reassure her not to worry. Noah's suffering might stem from his innate kindness. Now, words were useless. Noah's disappearance was a devastating blow to her. The belief that had sustained her for so long collapsed in an instant. Gao Hanshui felt the same. Everything he had done was for Noah. Yet now, it all seemed to vanish into thin air. He drowned himself in alcohol at the bar, numbing the pain. Where could Noah possibly be? He had dispatched so many people. How could they find not a single clue? He hadn't even had money on him when he left home. How could he survive out there for so long? After leaving home, Noah was starving and freezing. With nowhere else to turn, he pawned his gold watch and made his way alone to Nagano. He wanted to make a living with his own hands, but fate led him to the door of a pachinko parlor. When the shopkeeper asked about his identity, he lied, claiming he wasn't Korean.